Hello and welcome to another edition of a Fireside Chat for PDC. Today we're joined by John and David from PDC, with me, Matt, also from PDC. We're going to be talking about the subject of white privilege and going to be going through a couple of examples. The question time is probably going to come up with regards to Lawrence Fox and the audience member, and we'll just see where it goes from there, as usual. So, welcome, David.
Hello.
Hello, Dave.
Glad to be here.
Excellent, and we're glad to have you here, and we're joined by John.
No, I'm Scott Lady, so everything I say, that's him that's saying it, just so everyone knows.
That's fair. So, the thing that inspired this conversation today is that me and David got into a discussion regarding the nature of white privilege, and it became quite apparent quite quickly that it was worth having an actual dialogue rather than doing it via text. And that's fair, isn't it, David?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so has anyone got a definition of white privilege they want to work with, or shall I just throw one down?
Well, I'd like to start with where it came from, because from looking into it, it seemed to have come from a Miss Peggy McIntosh,
Okay.
who did a paper called White Privilege and Male Privilege, and it was her personal account of it leading her through the 70s, and she published the paper in 1988.
Yep.
And it just went into basically her opinion. It wasn't really peer reviewed. It wasn't, it's hard to explain, but it was like
So
it wouldn't sort of pass the tests of an academic paper.
Yeah, so you're suggesting that it's not, if we're going by that definition and what she said, sorry, is this the definition you're wanting to work with?
No, I'm up to all. I just wanted to lay it out there that this is, white privilege came from this.
Yeah,
it's since evolved.
So do most ideas in anything?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
But being as we're talking about white privilege, it's probably best to
I completely
where
agree.
it came
but
from.
Given that there has been a development since, that isn't the definition we're going to be working with.
Right. Okay.
Well, I don't know.
What definition would you like to throw out?
If you want to work with it, that's fine.
I'm working with.
Huh?
It's not really the definition. It's really her idea of it, and it's like it's evolved from there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
And other people have added to it, and this, that, the other, and that's where we want to be making the discussion, I think.
Okay, so so I just pitch you a quick one. I mean, this is pretty much from the top page.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, it's on the top page of Wikipedia for white privilege, the entry for white privilege. Anyone got a problem with that?
No.
Yeah, so
that's the one I'm looking at.
Yeah, white privilege is the societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people in some societies, particularly if they are otherwise under the same social, political, or economic circumstance. It has its roots in European colonialism, the Atlantic slave trade, and the growth of Second British Empire after 1783. White privilege has developed. This is from that era that white privilege has developed. So it's yeah. What's everyone's response to that?
Well, it seems to have predetermined, it's more of a collectivist idea, that is. It's predetermined all white people, or it suggests that white people, it comes from white people, and it's inherently white people, and it's a structural form from the past.
What gives you that impression?
From what you've just read out from Wikipedia.
Yeah, what in that makes you think that it's suggesting that all white people are responsible for this?
Because it mentions white people.
So you hear the word white people and you think it's...
No, it's because that's what it literally said.
So what it says is the
What are
societal
you supposed
privilege
to
that
take from
benefits
that?
white people over non-white people in some societies, particularly if they are otherwise under the same social, political, and economic circumstance, with roots in European colonialism, the Atlantic slave trade, and growth of the Second British Empire, 1783. So it has its roots in that. It's not saying that it
Yeah.
is purely because of
Uh,
that. It's also pointing out that it is in some societies, not all societies, and when it says some, it specifically means some majority white societies.
It
correct.
also
So
says
it's
further on that these advantages are obvious sometimes and less obvious passive advantages.
Yes.
yeah. So it could be majority privilege or
So
culture
what? No. What I'm
privilege.
what I
Well, it
mean. What I'm get.
is.
Sorry. What I'm getting at here is you claim this was some sort of collectivist argument, and that this was painting all white people in this light. Given the fact that there is actually quite a lot of nuance set out in that initial definition, you still think it's collectivist?
Oh, of course it is. Because it focuses on the group and the group identity.
No, it focuses on certain groups in certain circumstances, which is like
Yeah. Well,
as I said, it has nuance.
yeah.
It is not making the claim that white people have this privilege. All white people. It doesn't say that. It says it is what is it? Is the societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people in some societies, particularly if they are otherwise
Right.
under the same.
Which society are we talking about?
That's a good question. Which we can talk about some examples and then explore this concept of white privilege in those societies.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So which,
Where do you? Okay, so I mean, can we? Do you mind if we go through the definition that I laid out?
yeah, no, that's fine.
Just
I've read
because
the
just because I'm
Wikipedia
most
one.
familiar with that.
Okay.
So the one I was looking at with regards to if you were to like analyze the distribution, if you were to look at per capita incarcerations of people by country, the US hands down wins
For
for per
say that
capita
again.
incarcerations.
Sure.
Yep.
Per capita incarcerations.
Yeah, per capita. So what?
Oh yeah, we lock people up.
Yeah, so what that stat is saying that America, relative to every other country, locks up more of its citizens than anyone else.
That's very correct.
So,
It says a lot of people won't let us, a lot of places won't let us execute them anymore.
so I didn't catch what you said, David.
No, that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you were to like take, let's like for a moment, just because I think this helps with understanding what is meant by white privilege when you're looking at white privilege. Let's look at like a really linear reason for why this might be. Okay. So America does that more than anywhere else. Is that because Americans commit disproportionately more crime than anyone else?
Yeah. What do
Can
you
I
think?
say yes without knowing?
You can absolutely. But my point,
Okay,
my
cool.
point is, what we're doing right now is a kind of lateral analysis, aren't we?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so
Or another example of a lateral analysis of that would be maybe America is better at capturing criminals and incarcerating them.
Or because private prisons is a big business here.
Oh, now we're not looking at lateral arguments. We're now looking at late-stage capitalism analysis. I like it, John.
Because that is also a problem around here.
Oh,
People want them to keep. They want them to keep coming back. Every
John,
inmate is more money.
John, you utter Marxist. That is nothing more than Marxist propaganda.
Oh, okay. Well,
Do we?
that's the truth, though.
Are we starting to see what I'm getting at?
can we get to the point what it's got to do with white privilege?
Yeah, no, we absolutely can. So, if we're going to look at, if we look at the racial dynamics of American prison incarceration, minorities, and particularly African American minority groups, are disproportionately, relative to the population, incarcerated.
Is that because they commit more crime?
Oh, this is an excellent question, David. Is it because they commit more crimes?
It's because they're more brazen.
Is it because they're more John's saying it's because they're more brazen, right?
That's just anecdotal for me. I live in the hood.
Okay.
No, but wait a second.
What if I
live in the hood.
Go on, sorry.
I live in the hood.
You live in the hood?
I'm mostly a black community. Okay.
Yeah, go on.
And one of the first things, and I came from a middle class white community. Now, I chose to live here. Now, The first thing we noticed when we moved here
Mm-hmm.
was that the black residents will be smoking their blunts walking down the middle of the street.
Yep.
They're not trying to hide it like white people are. We're in the house hiding it. Someone comes over, we make sure it's all put away.
Oh, so you think that there's like a racial component to how good people are at hiding their crimes?
Maybe, but that's just what I've noticed. I'm not
Or-
saying
or
I think that.
cultural.
I'm saying anecdotally,
Or
that's what
cultural.
I've noticed.
Yeah, no, but my point, the reason I keep framing this in different ways is to kind of highlight the point that one can frame things in a number of different ways and interpret them a number of different ways with those framings.
But as the incarceration rate goes, you are correct per capita.
Yep,
More
I'm also
white people-
I'm also
more white
correct that
people are in
disproportionately.
jail, but
Yeah, John, I'm also correct that disproportionately more minority groups are represented in the prison system. I've yet
Yes,
to
absolutely.
I've yet to offer a reason for why.
I'll tell you what, I was in the car one time with the guy, and he was, taking me to the bank. My car had broken down, and, he was selling to me.
Yeah.
And he was looking around, his eyes were shooting over. And I was like, what are you doing? And, he was telling me he was looking out for cops and everything else. I was like, we're not doing anything wrong. And he was like, they'll pull you over, just for being suspicious. And I says, I've never in my life been pulled over just for looking suspicious. And he shot me the most incredulous look I've ever seen.
What the look
Could
of the
not
look of
believe it.
the look of check your privilege?
No, the look of, are you serious? That's never happened to you? He was too young to know about it. He was like 17, 18. But the thought that I've never in my... He knew I was an older guy. The thought that I'd never in my life been pulled over just on suspicion was amazing to him.
Yeah. Do you think that's?
Is
Do
it-
you think? Do you think?
You know.
Do you think African Americans feel the same way as you?
There's,
No.
there's one
They
thing I want to
absolutely
add to this.
Yeah, go
There's a
on.
multitude of different reasons why people would be locked up.
Oh yeah, we're getting to that.
The-
Oh,
You know,
I have more
it-
anecdotal
it-
stories to tell you.
Yeah, no, John, it's a very good story, and like it actually is a really good point you're making because it is going to be relevant. Yeah, David, you're completely right. None of this is explaining why people are locked up.
yeah.
Okay, so
I mean, well, it explains why people are locked up, but the reasons for the people being locked up are there could be a million different
yeah, I completely
reasons
agree.
why.
I completely
It
agree.
could be,
Dave,
it could be something to
I
do
think
with.
there was a study that said white people are how many more times likely to have illegal drugs in their cars, but way less likely to be pulled over and searched.
Yep,
Something of that nature. I read that somewhere.
Yep.
That was a study that was done.
this might perhaps be an example of institutional racism.
How more people get incarcerated, though, is where I was going with that.
Yeah, so that might be an example of institutional racism.
Yeah, you see,
Well, that's
another
actually more
thing.
of a statistical example.
Yeah, I know, but that's
I
why,
remember-
John, that's why I said it might be an example. I'm not saying it is an example, but the fact that that discrepancy has been studied and found confirms that there is a discrepancy, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. David, sorry, you wanted to say something.
No, but you see, this is like confusing, really, because there could, like I say, there could be a multitude of different reasons why someone's banged up in prison,
Mhm.
the reasons they're being stopped, and you could say it's institutional racism. But
I can say it might be an example of institutional
yeah, well,
racism.
or it might be institutional racism. But
Mm.
don't you think the laws have gotten better towards that? You know,
I
if
mean,
you go back to the 50s,
David,
if you go back
David,
to the 50s and 60s, it was a lot more racist back then than it is
yeah,
now.
David, back then Jim Crow
It was
laws
pretty
still
bad
exist.
in the 90s.
Sorry, it was
when
55
Hillary
Jim Crow.
Clinton was
Sorry, what was that, John?
Hillary Clinton was calling black youth super predators just back in the 90s.
So, like, John, was it in the 50s that Jim Crow ended?
I think it was the 60s.
Okay, right.
I'd have to
Yeah,
look.
so David, you're completely right that there's been advances in the law. So, for example, the ending of Jim Crow laws made it essentially illegal
65.
65. Thank you very
Yeah.
much, John.
It's the same here as well. The same in the UK.
Well,
as well.
I don't think we ever had racial segregation in the UK.
No, but we're talking about white privilege.
Well,
So-
you
so
were
the-
talking
so the
about
fund-
changes in the law, Dave. So we're
Yeah, I know,
discussing
but
that.
it's related to white. It's related to white privilege
Okay.
because the assumption is that this systemic racism from the top down, or privilege for white people from the top down.
No, that's not what the assumption is.
Well,
So hang on, you think white privilege is that, like, so the president and prime minister, like, hate, are racist,
no, I
and
don't
it can
think
only
that.
come
No, I
from
don't
there,
think that at
or that the
all.
cabinet is racist and it can only come from there?
No,
So
I
it's not a
don't think
question
that
of
at all.
top down, it's a question of the institutions that have power over us have internal biases that have yet to be corrected. It's not that an individual is responsible for that, but the aggregate of individual interactions results in this discrepancy.
No, I'm talking about over time. So from the 50s and
Okay.
60s, so from the 50s and 60s, yeah,
Yes.
over time, we are gradually, not as racist. We're forever getting better. So
Yeah, I agree with you there.
if
I just
white privilege is systemic in the upper echelons of society, the patriarchal, why is it they're changing the laws over time to make it not so?
Well, because you can change a law, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's enforced or that it's enforced evenly, which is what I was
Yeah,
going to
but
get, which is something I was going to get at with regards to.
yeah, but it is enforced, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah, of course it is. You
Um,
can't get away. You can't get away with
what was
discrimination
the
now.
story? What was the story John shared earlier?
Oh, the
Yeah,
renting story?
The story of John driving around with illicit
Oh,
substances in
being
his.
pulled over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it
And
enforced there?
for every story of that, you can have 1,000 stories where
Right, okay, you
justice
can
has
have
been
1,000
upheld.
stories, so let's go to John's other example, which was looking at the disproportionate pulling over of non-white people who drive cars. Is that an individual story, or is that an aggregate of stories?
Well, we're talking about white privilege, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
There's
So are we
absolutely.
not talking
It's a
about it as a
tribalism
whole?
thing.
Sorry, who
It's,
wants to talk? Because I'd like...
Go ahead, David.
What
I want to hear what
happens
David had to
is
say.
Yeah.
what happens is you predetermine people into groups, and that
Who
in
is we?
itself,
Sorry.
the idea is that you're predetermined into groups. Identity politics puts you
No, we're
into
talking about
groups.
right privilege here. This has got nothing to do with identity politics right now.
Well, it has. That has
Okay, make the case for it, Dave.
because white is an identity,
Okay,
according
but
to.
white privilege isn't to do with that. Like, what?
It is an identity. White privilege is an identity. Take it like the
No,
black
no.
community is an
Being
identity.
white is an identity. White privilege is a way of looking at things to do with how we treat races that aren't white.
From a specific point of view,
What,
and
that
from
we're
a
white?
minority's point of view, given a group identity.
Okay. No, again, like, as I've tried to lay out, we are talking about the issues of institutional discrepancies. So that can mean that the individual, i.e., the individual white person, in their actions might not be being racist, or they may have they may have a bias that they don't realise, but is based on race. And when
It's
we
not.
and when I need to finish this point because you're still not quite getting it, David. So when we look at these minor biases that may not be overt racism, the aggregate result is that there does seem to be a discrepancy. Now that narrative that I've just painted for you there completely explains John's study citation, where it says that white people tend not to get pulled over. Now, what does
It's
it?
not.
Now, does that?
It's
Now,
not.
just to be clear, does that mean that every officer that pulls over a black person is racist? No. It doesn't. What it means is that there is a mild bias that either is expressed overtly or not, or covertly, or unconsciously. Now that does not imply a level of intent on the officer. Does that make sense? So
because you inferred that it's implied to the individual when it isn't.
I've literally just explained to you how it's not to do with the individual, but the aggregate result of individual choices, Dave. And I don't really know how we can go any further here until you understand that concept.
Well, a lot of it is statistic based too, though.
Absolutely,
exactly.
John. I completely agree with you.
And we all know how statistics can be skewed to offer a point of
No,
view.
but what I'm saying
so
is
what we're saying here,
because.
sorry, what we're saying here now is that anecdote isn't a good example, and the actual
But
studies
no.
looking at this are the good examples.
But look at this. But look at the study of incarceration. You
No, I'm
cited
saying is it
how
doesn't tell the full
minorities
picture
are far
and
more
anecdotal evidence. Because
likely
anyone
to
can
be
pick
arrested or put in
anecdotal.
jail. But
Sorry.
think of the study. Think of the original study where you said minorities are more likely to be incarcerated or arrested or whatever the case may be. Okay, so those are actually put out. That's how you know about them. The police have to go by that. So they're more likely to pull those people over who are more likely that they think to get a bust. You understand? It's kind of like a vicious circle
so
in that way.
now we've discovered a mechanic in the current justice system that actually inherently biases it. So yeah, in 55, the law was changed so that you couldn't discriminate, but that doesn't change the fact that the prison system was still overrepresented of the race, of minority races. What could that suggest? That could suggest that by using the mechanic you've just explained, John, why it continues to be the case that so many minorities are disproportionately represented in the prison system. So would that suggest that there is a structural problem?
But when it's corrected, things get worse.
When it's corrected, things get worse.
Yes, and I'll tell you what I mean by that.
It's like you're working on the assumption that they're the police are inherently racist towards people.
No, Dave, I really went out of my way to make it clear that that's not what I was doing. What are you struggling with here? Sorry, boss, but like, I really clearly said to you, does that mean that all officers are racist? No. Does that mean that they are all overtly racist? No. Does it mean that they're all covertly racist? No. Does it mean that they're all subconsciously racist? No. It means that the aggregate result of all the police officers involved in that part of the legal system, the aggregate result results in a bias that would appear to be based on race. Is that me? Now, Dave, this is really important. Is that me? Is that me?
To be based on race.
Is that me? No, Dave, is that me claiming that every one of those officers is racist?
No.
No, thank you.
It's you suggesting that it appears to be based on race.
Yes.
Right, but we're talking through that.
That's what you said.
Okay.
We're talking through that.
When it's not appeared to be based on an individual committing a crime and getting sent to jail for it.
So you don't... Sorry, David, do you not understand what aggregate results are?
Aggregate results for...
Well, in statistics.
Right, okay. So explain it.
Okay, so I'll give an example. So you know that game you occasionally get at fun fairs where you've got a jar full of beans, and people pay money to guess how many beans are in the jar, and then eventually everyone goes away. Sorry, and then at the end they go through all the answers, and the one who got it closest wins.
Yeah.
Right. So what you can do, here's an interesting thing: the more people that you ask that question, if you take every guess, add them all up and then divide them by the amount of guesses, the average result you get becomes it gets closer and closer to the actual amount of beans in the jar, the more people guess.
Well, it depends on what they're guessing in it.
So what can we infer about the aggregate result there? Can we infer that everyone guessed correctly? No. Can we infer that everyone knew what was in the jar? No. But we can confirm that the average result of all the guesses, of all the interactions, of all the decisions to act in a particular way, aggregated to the actual answer. Does that make sense?
It makes sense in sort of the law of averages, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to take that concept and we're going to apply it to the incarceration system. No, sorry.
How
No,
can you
sorry.
imply that
We're
to the
gonna apply. We're gonna
incarceration
apply it to
system?
the police officers
It's
who
two
pull over
completely
people.
different situations
So now we're going to apply that analysis.
with
No,
different.
David. This is literally how mathematics works, and I am not getting into a debate about the nature of mathematics with you.
Well, that's okay, but mathematics is only one single part of the reason why.
So you don't want to use statistics, you don't want to use studies, and you don't want to use anecdotal evidence. What do you want to use, David?
I want to use what you think about it,
I'm
why you
trying
come
to,
to your
Dave.
conclusions,
I'm
without
trying to
using like.
explain what I think about it and why I think it, and you don't. What you're not
It's not
interested
that I
in that.
don't want to use. It's not that I don't want to use anecdotal evidence. What I'm saying is that everyone can use anecdotal evidence.
Okay, so then we looked at a study. Can we use that study, David?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay, so there's the study that shows that that minority groups are disproportionately pulled over. Do you accept that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Then there's
The reasons why
I'm
they're pulled
saying
over
regarding
are
the
multiple now.
Sorry, go on.
The reasons why they're pulled over are multiple now, aren't they?
Yes,
It
but
can't be
yes,
selective.
yeah, Dave, they are, but they aggregate down to what?
Minorities commit more crimes.
Sorry, you don't get pulled over for committing a crime. You get pulled over for being suspicious or being suspected of committing a crime.
Well, if they're using statistics where minorities are usually committing more crimes, they're obviously going to be more suspicious,
And
aren't
what
they?
did John say that those statistics were based off?
You tell me, John.
Incarceration rates,
Yeah.
excuse me, arrest rates, those kind of things, and it's like a circle in that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
But
it's almost,
I
almost
saw,
as if it's self-reinforcing.
well, and the funny thing is, I remember, because I used to live in Chicago, and I still have a lot of feeds on that. I remember it was last year or sometime early last year, late in 2018, and I was watching a video of the police chief, and he was being asked why they couldn't handle Inglewood, which is the neighborhood, if you go look, where most of the murders happen.
Hmm.
It's just that Chicago is considered all of Upper Illinois. And he said, well, statistically, that's where I should be sending most of my officers. And he was very frustrated. And he said, if I do that and I over-patrol, then I get accused of racial profiling. If I spread my officers out throughout the city, as I've been doing, people die. What do you want me to do?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, there's another way of looking at it, isn't it? Do we have any statistics for people that are incarcerated what shouldn't be in there?
Yes.
Is there any evidence that they shouldn't be there in the first place?
Yes.
There's a few different arguments on the incarceration that I've heard. One is that
sorry, John.
they do harsher penalties for drugs that are more likely to be used by African Americans.
So, John, can I just ask? Is there? I'm right in thinking that there's currently an issue within the American justice system regarding plea deals, right?
That was another thing I was going to mention. Is that?
Please do.
You know, they're more likely to plea out to get a sentence.
Dave, the plea deal thing, just to be clear, so that's people who have been arrested and accused of a crime, but because they can't necessarily afford to go to court, or because to actually fight to fight it properly, they don't have the means to do it. They take a plea.
They get a public defender, but those guys just kind of say, take a plea.
Yeah. So essentially, they are confessing to committing a crime that they potentially didn't commit.
Right.
It's a bully tactic. You know, you could get 3 years, but if you plea, you're only going to get 6 months to a year. You know.
Would you consider that? Sorry, can I just ask?
It's the same with the UK as well.
Yeah. Can I just ask, David? Would you consider that an example of the privilege of the wealthy?
Definitely.
Excellent.
Definitely privilege of the wealthy.
So you can attribute a general concept to a group if it's regarding wealth.
Yeah, but everyone's got different wealth, haven't
they? But court proceedings tend to have an amount associated with them, like a murder trial that goes to the High Court after an appeal that succeeded. That has a pretty fixed cost to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
As
the same
opposed
with healthcare.
to drug dealing.
Same with healthcare over there
Yeah.
as well.
So just to be clear, everyone has different amounts of wealth.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Just as
But
everyone can be different amounts of racist
that amount of wealth
or
isn't
biased.
determined by race.
Did I say
It's not
that?
determined by.
Did
No,
I say that?
I'm saying it's not.
Okay, that's fine, but we're not talking about race for the moment. What I'm trying to ascertain here is why earlier, when you were making the collectivist argument against white privilege, because you claimed that it was painting all white people as racist, you couldn't make the leap that you have just made with wealth privilege.
No, I can make the link, but the first one's
Oh,
linked on
fantastic!
race.
Okay, we don't have a problem then. So we
Yeah,
understand.
the first one's linked on race.
So we understand that the term white privilege is not accusing all white people of being racist.
No, it's accusing a single race of having more privilege than others.
Okay, yeah, I can work with that.
That's
That
my
wasn't
point.
what you were saying earlier, David.
And when you think about it, that's collectively choosing a single race and attributing something to them.
David, I'm sorry to kind of hold you on this, but that is not the argument you were making earlier. You were implying that white privilege is a form of racism. You were saying, in fact, that white privilege.
No, I'm saying other people. I say it's a form of racism. I'm completely the other end.
But
of the scale.
you don't accept the concept of white privilege because of what other people say white privilege is, which is a form of racism. Is that correct?
No, I don't accept it in the form that it's being portrayed.
Okay, and I'm trying to portray it to you.
I accept some white people have privilege.
Okay.
I accept that.
Okay.
But so do all other colours, and all other nationalities, and all other ethnicities.
Okay, so when in the definition that I read from Wikipedia it said some societies, do you think that might have been an example of the nuance it was talking about?
Well, yeah, definitely. Obviously, there's no white privilege in Africa.
David, it's taken all of this to get to that. It's taken all of what we're talking about, spoken about so far, to get you to acknowledge that.
But weren't we talking about the UK? And I thought that was obvious.
Well, I said earlier to you, do you mind if we look at incarceration statistics in the US, because I'm more familiar with that to make...
Well, the UK and the US, it's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
No, it's not, because one country is the US and one country is the UK. One country had Jim Crow laws and... When did that end? 55. Another country didn't have that.
65.
Yeah, 65. Sorry, John. Thanks. Another country had an empire globally. The other country also has an empire globally.
Discrimination.
Sorry, go on.
Laws against race discrimination was in 65 here as well.
Sorry. The ending of Jim Crow laws didn't end racial discrimination. There was still other law that had to be signed in for that.
No, I'm talking about here.
Yeah, no.
In the UK, 1965 was.
Was it?
I'm talking about 65 is when the last remaining Jim Crow stuff was stamped out by civil rights acts.
John, was that to do with how it was rolled out statewide? So, like, there was a federal mandate, but it took states a long time to fall into line.
Because because they were going through desegregation in the 50s.
Yeah, that's why I'm getting 50s from. Yeah, okay.
Right, but it wasn't until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 that overruled the remaining Jim Crow laws.
Dave, can you hear us?
No, it's okay. I just thought I heard a weird sound. I don't know if I'd lost contact.
All right, no worries. Okay, yeah, John, sorry, you were saying?
No, I'm just saying you were right in that the legislation to end the Jim Crow laws was in the 50s and into desegregation, but there were states that held out, and it wasn't until those acts in the 64 and 65 that finally got rid of the remaining holdouts. So when I say 65, I mean like the very, very end of Jim Crow everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were fighting that battle for a good decade.
Yeah. Yeah,
People like to hang on to their segregation.
There is actually another concept regarding this incarceration rate in the US that I think you're probably in a better position to talk about than I am, John. The three strikes policy.
That's in California, I believe, right?
Is that just in California?
Yeah, I was going to say, is that federal law or just?
I don't think that's federal law. I thought that was California. I'm not even sure if they still do that anymore, since California's very liberal. I will check.
Yeah, I'm looking it up now. Well,
Let's see if that was
wow, three
overturned.
strikes law.
Originally enacted in 94. It doesn't say if it was expelled.
No.
28 states have some form of three strikes law.
Yeah. Okay. And they enforce it in different ways. So for some, they'll only use it for violent crime. In others, it includes things like drug possession and other things. Is that right?
I don't know, but I'm looking
no,
at
it's
it
okay.
now.
It's okay. Look, the only reason I bring it up is because if you fall foul of the three strikes rule, you then get a life sentence.
Right.
So
3 strikes, you're out.
Exactly. So this might help to explain why the incarceration rates in the US are so high. Because people are in prison for longer.
I'd agree to that.
Yep.
Like I said, they won't let us execute him anymore.
Has anyone ever been executed because of violating the three strikes rule?
That's not the argument. It's
But
that
that's
heaven
my
forfend,
point.
we get
So
one
it is
wrong.
the argument, John.
But no one's ever been executed for this three strikes rule. That's
Right.
because
So
they
the
won't
three
let us
strikes.
execute
So the
people
three
anymore.
strikes rule might explain why the incarceration rates are so high in the US because people are in prison for longer.
So we need to support.
It could also
punishment.
explain why because people choose personally to have free strikes.
Sorry, I didn't catch that last part. What's that again?
It could be that the perpetrators choose to have free strikes and not change their ways, and it's one of it's a reason why.
Yeah, sure.
They're all capable of knowing what the law is,
and then there's
the free will to choose what they
I
do.
completely agree. But then there's also the possibility that the three strikes that they got are because they took 3 plea deals, all of which for crimes they didn't commit.
Maybe.
Yeah. So you remember earlier when you were talking about how complex all of this was?
It's very complex.
Yeah. This would be an example of that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the aggregate result of that complexity and what it's resulted in. So, what it's resulted in is that minorities are disproportionately represented in the American prison system, relative to the percentage of the minorities within the U.S. population. Why do you think that might be?
Asking me or John?
Anyone, either of you, doesn't matter.
Like I say, just as complex it is. Yeah, just as it's complex for the free strike rule, it's very complex why that could be the case. It could be the fact that they live in fatherless homes, they choose to go down the wrong path in life.
Sorry.
There's many reasons, isn't there, why someone's in prison.
In the 90s, we focused specifically on African American youth and small-time drug trade. And plea deals resulted in a lot of people being put in prison. You can go look that up. Now, what's happened is those statistics have led to more racial profiling based on statistics. When I moved into the hood, there's a little corner store up the street. And I was new to the neighborhood, and I was looking to pick up. And I had no one, you know what I'm saying? And the old men were sitting around the store, drinking their drink or talking or smoking their cigarettes, whatever. And they knew someone who could pick up for me, but I'm an old white guy hanging around, so they don't necessarily trust me right away, right?
Yeah, right on.
And they think what they're going to do to get rid of me is they're going to try to scare me away. And they're going to say, you better go, man. The cops are coming around. The cops are going to be here any minute, man. They roll past here all the time. And I was confident enough to look them in the eyes and say, man, they're not looking for me.
Jesus, John. Jesus Christ.
Because I don't have a problem with an officer. When an officer walked up to me, I'd show him
Oh,
my
sure,
ID, I'd say, "Sir, I
John.
live
Sure,
down this
yeah,
street."
right.
I'm not going to get hassled. I'm just not.
John, are you doing a bit? Are you fucking with me?
No, I'm being serious.
Okay.
I understand.
I'm not going to get a hassle. I've never had a hassle with the police. There was a time my wife loves
John,
telling this
colour me
story.
shocked.
Back
You know
in
what?
Chicago.
I've never had a hassle with the police either. And I have given them plenty of reason to bother me.
I have been. No, you tell me. I had one guy thought he was on a high-speed chase.
Yeah.
Because I was doing 50 in a 25, going to get dinner for me and my ex-wife, and I pulled over with no. And he pulled me over. Finally, he'd called in a high-speed chase. I didn't have my insurance on me. I rolled up to the house and couldn't find it. And my wife came down to talk to him, and she asked him, "Is he insured?" And she goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "All right, well, tell him not to do that shit anymore." And he rolled off.
Yeah.
Now, how many other non-white people are going to get off that lightly on a high-speed chase that was called in? He was not thrilled with me when he pulled me up, when I finally did pull over.
I bet some of them end up getting shot.
Maybe. There was a story, the one guy who got shot with his hands behind his back.
Yeah.
Things like that can happen because of the split reaction of an individual police officer.
Okay.
No, it's not. I'm very big on supporting the police. I don't think this is an internal problem. I think a lot of these, and people will tell me, police have a rough job, and you get scared and you shoot this, that, and another. And I thought back when I was growing up, a police officer shooting any civilian of any color was major news. Shooting was a last resort.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of people try to make the argument that shoot first, ask questions later is the safe way to go about it. Well, fuck, I could be a cop under those constraints.
Yeah. Yeah.
The police are not the judge and the executioner to be shooting the suspect. There was a story of a guy, I watched the video, I don't know if it exists anymore, and he was being pulled over for something in some university area. I think like a broken taillight, something, just some bullshit ticket. He didn't. And after talking with this cop for a while, he decided, fuck it, I'm going to speed off. Not the illegal thing to do, right? He was definitely breaking the law. He definitely could have gotten a minor sentence for that, but what he got was shot in the head.
My good God.
Now, come on. For trying to just take off from a ticket, shot in the head?
Yeah.
Give me a break.
That's bad.
So,
John, are you aware of Brandon Tatum, is it? Have you seen anything by him on social media?
I've heard
the black
name,
the black guy who's an ex-copper. I suggest you look him up, like, because he goes into this pretty good, like,
Boston Celtics.
coming from a police officer's point of view.
It's hard. We have you go Google how many police officers and how many different districts and offices work in the U.S. The numbers will stagger you by comparison. And these people are all not trained uniformly the same like they might be over there. It's a big mess in that way.
Yeah. So
any information he could look up is just where he's from.
So
not all over the U.S.
John, just so I understand you right, so you're saying that like the propensity towards escalating the response by police officers tends to be pretty rapid with people who aren't white.
I've never witnessed it, but I've seen the stories.
Yeah.
I just know that I've never experienced any toward myself. I've seen video of some white girl who got pulled over, and she was just giving the officer the business. She was drunk and pissed and was just shouting at him like he was a pile of shit.
Yeah.
And he just stood there and took it.
But
yeah.
Okay.
He'd probably get in a lot of trouble if he'd done something to her.
Why? Because of poor white girl.
You guys, you guys watch South Park?
Yeah.
Do you remember the episode
I went to a school called South Park.
They did the Zimmerman episode, and Zimmerman was being called the hero for shooting the black kid or whatever, and then Hartman comes up in the blackface and he shoots him, and the officers are like, "Oh, another good job by you. You saved the day. This, that, and the third. You'll have to live with it." And then they go, "Hey, this kid's white," and then they cut to the next scene as the guy's in the electric chair.
Fucking hell. Oh, this was that thing. This was that Elizabeth Smart thing as well, wasn't it? That like made national headlines in the US, which was
Because the little white girl got missing.
yeah,
I got a video of a black woman in the middle of the streets in LA shouting about how many black girls are missing
yeah,
in the US that no one's looking for really. And he says, and you're out here complaining about rights for illegals.
yeah,
She's got a point.
yeah. So do you think that odd well, you're saying that you're saying you've not actually seen studies that confirm that there is
Oh, I mean, disproportionate treatment? I mean, studies, no, but anecdotal stories everywhere under the sun, left and because those are the ones that get pumped out.
yeah, no, I get you. So, David, do you think that that's just because of people playing the race card or something else, or
I think that's got a part of it, playing the race card,
right?
because it's when you split people into their communities, you are actually dividing people, and yet it seems really weird that that's the path America's going down when they're built on immigrants.
Yeah,
It seems
It's
just
crazy.
totally,
We changed
totally
a lot of
strange
different
how-
things.
why you do that in the first place.
why
don't
you do
know.
You
what?
know,
Sorry.
it's like the black community's here, the Latino community's here, the white community's there, and yet they all live together.
Oh, that's
And
fantastic.
then you've got areas where they don't, and white people can't walk down there. Then
Oh,
there's
no,
only white people live there. That,
Dave,
you
you
know,
reminded me of something. And this might be another example of what I'm talking about with regards to like aggregate result and how it's not necessarily individually that the acts themselves are prejudiced. So
Well,
they did some research. What they were basically trying to work out is why you tend to get pockets of different races in a city. So you'll have like locales where it's disproportionately black people, disproportionately Mexican people, disproportionately white people, disproportionately Italian and shit like that, right?
yeah,
And what they did was they did a bunch of different simulations where they created like these big grids and they made just a couple of rules. And one of the rules was and the grids, they had squares in them, and the squares were a variety of different colours. So you had like blue, red, yellow, green, and so on, right? None of them were representing a race, but they were being used as a facsimile for race. And what the rules that they gave these tiles was that for if you were surrounded by tiles that none of which matched your colour, you would move. And then once you had a single colour next to you, you had like a X percentage chance of moving again. And so what they did is they ran that experiment like, let's say, 12 times. Actually, no, sorry, it wasn't even that if you didn't have a colour matching you that you would move. You had something like a 0.2% chance of moving. Right? So we're talking about a 0.2% chance. I wouldn't call a 0.2% preference racist. Does that make sense?
no,
It doesn't make sense.
a 0.2%.
Yeah, so let's...
I didn't really understand what you getting at with the tiles.
What he's kind of saying
Is it like a computer simulation or something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or
Mm-hmm.
were real people involved, or
There were no real people weren't involved.
Simulation.
It was just a simulation, and they wanted to see what would happen after they ran like, I think it was something like 20 iterations. So they gave the tiles each tile 20 chances to potentially move. And the only value that they had was that if they had no the only criteria that they had was that if there was no tile matching their colour around them, so that's they had access to 4 other tiles because they were squares, right? So there can only be 4 tiles flanking them. If none of the tiles next to them matched their colour, there would be a 0.2% chance of that tile moving. So that means that not all the tiles are going to move every time, right?
yeah,
And then they did that 20 times. And after 20 iterations, they looked at the color distribution of all the tiles. And what did they see? They saw pretty much a very good facsimile of the racial distributions that you see in cities.
Surely that depends on the data you put in.
It does, yeah. It depends on the 0.2%.
Yeah.
Right. So they did play around with these figures, like to work out, like, at what point did these pockets start cropping up? Because, you know, if you go lower, eventually it doesn't start happening. But all we're talking about here is a tile's bias towards its own colour. And all we're talking about with regards to the level of that bias is something like 0.2%.
But every one of those coloured tiles have all got the same bias.
Absolutely.
Right, but if you transfer that over to human beings,
yep,
the level of difference would be completely different, wouldn't it?
That's fine. No, David, I don't disagree with you. David,
think the same, will they?
David, I don't disagree with you. All I'm trying to point out here is that with a bias of only 0.2%, those pockets still occur.
Right.
Okay. So let's
transfer over to humans. Could that have something to do with like wanting to be within their own culture?
Absolutely. But the importance of that potentially could potentially only really have a value of 0.2% and still produce the distribution that we see today. Now, I wouldn't call a 0.2% preference that causes you to move racist.
No.
Would you?
No.
Fantastic. Dave, fantastic, right? So...
No, I wouldn't call it racist.
Exactly, but it is a bias, isn't it?
Something would have had to have particularly happened to you.
Right, but that is a bias.
For you to call it racist, you know.
Would you consider that 0.2%
a probability?
Yeah, would you consider that a bias, David?
I'm
not saying like a bias have to be negative.
It just seems rather simplistic.
I agree, but it does actually.
I can't see how it relates to human beings.
We're just trying to lay some groundwork.
Yeah, as John said, I'm just trying to lay.
I'm struggling to see where a computer program in relation to human beings and what they think.
So what we can say
can give you like something that you can come up with.
Okay.
That would represent the probability of it being true.
Oh, it's not a question of whether or not it's true. It's how well does it work as a facsimile to what we see as behaviour in reality.
Right.
Now, given that at 0.2%, it can still replicate patterns that we recognise and see in reality, that confirms that the bias can be something as small as 0.2% potentially. Is it certain of that? No, but nothing in science is. It's degrees of certainty, okay?
Yeah.
So, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because from a bias of as low as 0.2%, you can get these extraordinary patterns and aggregate results occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
I see it all the time.
Yeah. So, from a police officer's bias of as low as 0.2%, you potentially could explain why there is such a disproportionate representation with incarceration rates. Or if you look at like a judge's ruling and how long they sentence someone, and there have been studies in this, and judges have been shown in the US to disproportionately hand out longer sentences to minority groups, particularly African Americans. Now, is that saying that those judges are racist? No. It's saying that the bias that those judges have potentially is as low as 0.2%.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Exactly. Now we are getting on to the subject of white privilege.
Yeah, but the statistics don't tell the whole story. They never will. Because how many of these people who are going up before a judge have been up before and before?
Sorry, David. Do you think that the concept of white privilege is attempting to tell the whole story?
No.
No. Okay.
What
do you think it's trying to do?
I think it's an ideology.
Okay.
It's a political thought. That's what I think that is.
So what
There's no
it's
certainty. There's no certainties, and I'm not
so
saying all white people.
what is it about white privilege is the societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people in some societies, particularly if they are otherwise under the same social, political, and economic circumstance? What about that suggests to you that it is an ideology?
Because it comes from an ideological
No,
background.
it doesn't. It comes from a background where they are doing studies into why into where there are discrepancies in various institutions. One of which is the study John cited earlier with regards to disposition to pulling people over. Another is the disproportionate sentencing of judges. That is an attempt.
It
That
could
is
also,
an attempt
Let's
to actually get
it
evidence
could
for
also
that
be
subject.
because of the majority, or culturally.
Sorry, do you think that? Just to be clear, do you think that science is an ideology?
No,
I want to try to square the ideological circle if
because
I can.
science is more evidence based, whereas
Okay.
ideology is more thought based.
And you,
Or what's the
John,
word for it?
I do want you to come in
I
for a
can't
minute.
think of it.
John, I do want you to come in, but I just want to clarify something. And you think that white privilege is an ideology because it's not evidence based?
It's
Are you asking him? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm asking.
no, go on. No, you answer that, John, if you want.
No, I don't have an answer to that. You were the one who said that. Go ahead.
Right, okay. Yeah, I think it's ideology based.
But I've just been, but David, I've been trying to show you the evidence for it, but you keep refusing it. And your argument for against refusing it is because it's ideology based.
I think,
You haven't
like I said, I
shown
think
the
I can
evidence,
square
though.
that circle. I think I can
You've
square
already
that circle.
you already claimed that the evidence is not sufficient enough.
Yes,
to
David,
create
David, that's because I'm willing to acknowledge that there are no certainties in this, just degrees of probability.
Correct.
Right. Which isn't an argument against the point. You understand that, right?
You see, white privilege is an idea, isn't it? It's an idea
Sure.
that
It's both.
people of white. It's
Sure,
to do
and
with
there is the
it's to
idea
do
of
with
the
the
heliocentric
patriarchy.
universe, which is that the Earth goes round the sun. And it wasn't until we gathered evidence to show that the Earth does indeed go round the sun that we were able to confirm the heliocentric idea of how the universe worked.
Correct.
Right. So white privilege is an
So
idea, yes. And I'm trying to show you the evidence for it, but you're not particularly interested in listening to it. So I don't know
I've
how we
listened to every.
want to do
I've
this.
listened to the evidence you're given.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, it isn't conclusive, and a lot of it is based on an ideology.
Okay. John, sorry.
Different biases. Just as you're,
Go on, yeah.
not you personally, but as in general, the people who talk about white privilege, it's
Right.
based on a patriarchal system.
I mean,
It's based on
the patriarchy is to do with feminist theory. It's not to do with white privilege.
Yeah,
no.
I mean, I think what you're
disagree.
Dave. I think what you might be
I
alluding to is
disagree.
something called intersectionality, which
Yeah,
which tries to bring them all together.
They're all linked.
Yes, that's
It's-
intersectionality, David.
No, intersectionality is linked to postmodernism.
What is
It's also linked
postmodernism,
to-
David?
It's also linked to Marxism.
You understand that postmodernism and Marxism literally cannot exist together, and that this is exactly the kind of bullshit
because
that Jordan
one's an
Peterson gets
absolute.
called up for, right?
No, because one's an absolute and the other isn't.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The one's an absolute and the other isn't.
Neither of them are absolutes.
Well, it depends which point you're looking at it from.
Okay, make the case for one of them being an absolute. Which one's the absolute?
Well, the absolute of the like say Marxism theory. It's the rich against the poor, the haves against the have-nots.
That is not the absolute of
The-
Marxism.
The oppressed against the oppressors.
That is not the absolute of Marxism. Would you like to hear what?
No, I'm not saying that's the ideology behind it.
Okay, well, you're jumping
That's the
around with
theory.
terminology now, David, and I'm really trying to understand what it is you're trying to say. You're throwing around a lot of words, and it's kind of looking like you don't really understand what they mean.
Well, it's not about what you understand what they mean.
That's literally how
I mean-
language works, David. If
Yes,
if
I
I can't
understand
understand what you're saying, then we can't have a debate.
Well, if you can't understand what I mean, you can't have a debate.
Well, I want to try to bridge the gap of the white privilege, evidence-based versus being, I don't know about an ideology, but definitely part of an ideology.
Please do, John.
And it kind of goes to that question time clip. Now, what the woman was saying isn't necessarily wrong. I saw there was a meme about how the Daily Mail handled the bump thing with Kate versus Meghan.
Mm.
Now, I don't know what you want to call that, but the coverage was way different.
Mm.
Now, whether you want to call that racist or not, I don't know. Was there an inherent bias in that? Yes, you could see it. It was clear as day.
Could you call it white privilege, John?
You could.
Yeah.
You absolutely could. Now,
which is not the same as calling it
right.
racist, just to be clear.
Right. Now, he was right to have his view on it. If he didn't think it was racist, then that's fine.
Absolutely.
Where I think it falls into an ideology is when she says that because of his privilege, he doesn't understand. That's where it gets ideological.
That's a good argument.
That's the point I'm making.
John, that's an excellent argument.
The point I'm making.
However, how?
So you understand that, Matthew?
I do completely, which is why I'm about to respond to it.
That's the point
I'm
making.
Sorry. So, what was it that she said before he responded?
I mean, I don't have it memorized.
Okay,
man.
so what she was talking about was how the media coverage of Meghan had clearly been racist. Now, when she says the
that wasn't clear.
When she says
that wasn't clear.
No, that this is what she said, David.
Point.
David, this is what she said. I am talking about
the argument she was making.
Yes. You can disagree or agree with that, but that doesn't change the fact that is what she said. Okay?
Yeah, that was her argument.
So when she said that, do you think she was saying that the owners of those media companies are individually racist and there's some sort of racist conspiracy by those said individuals to go after Meghan?
I think it was her opinion.
Do you think she was suggesting that there is a bias within the media against certain people because of their race? Now, that I would argue she's arguing for institutional racism, which means that she's talking about white privilege, doesn't it?
Right.
Okay. So when he responds as a white male to "that isn't racist," you can't say that, and then proceeds to say white privilege is exactly the same as racism because you are judging me based on the color of my skin. And
I disagree with that.
And she calls it, well, what is it? She calls him, well, yeah, you would. She said you would say that because you're a white male. Is that something like that?
No, she said, what concerns me about your comments is you being a white privileged male.
Quite right. You're quite right, David. That is what she said. So, why do you think she said that, given that she had just made an argument pointing out that this potentially was white privilege? Do you think she was maybe saying? Do you think she was maybe saying it's a little fucking ironic? It's a little fucking ironic for a white man who is at that podium, who I am asking a question to as a woman of colour, to be suggesting to me that he understands racism better than I do. Based on the fact that I was talking about white privilege.
What you say there, that black people understand racism more than white people?
I'm saying that because she was making an argument from the
literal term is written out for everyone to read.
David, what I am saying there is that because she had opened with an argument that was making the case for it being a form of institutional racism, Lawrence's response clearly indicated that he had no fucking clue what she was saying.
No.
Yes.
I don't think so.
No, completely.
I think he completely understood what she was saying. She was like one of the many people bandy around
Lawrence,
the
much like you are right now,
Full
David.
stop.
Much like you are right now, David. assumed that she was being racist, as in against him because of the colour of his skin, and wasn't even
No,
prepared to consider the idea that there was institutional bias. He jumped straight to the individual rather than
She
the
didn't
idea
say
of an institutional bias. He jumped
No, but
straight.
if she'd
No,
have, if
sorry,
she'd have
sorry,
said,
David.
no,
He jumped
if she'd have
straight.
said
He
institutional
jumped straight
bias,
to making it
yeah,
about him.
if she'd have said institutional bias, it wouldn't have been like
That is
It'd
exactly
been a
what she
completely
had
different.
said, though. I
No,
just made the
no,
case
she
for it,
didn't.
David.
She said
I'm gonna have
that
to watch
let's
it.
call it what it is. It's racism, and he said no, it isn't
What
racism.
was she referring to when she said it's
the
racism?
press reports.
What was she?
The press reports.
The what? Sorry.
The press reports
Exactly.
towards
Press
Merkel.
of torn to pieces.
Sorry, what was that, John?
Never mind. I'm reading the transcript. You guys keep going.
Yeah. So she was referring to the press.
The press,
Yes.
yeah.
So is she
And-
is she saying that the entirety, every individual that works for the press is racist?
No.
No.
She was
What is
giving
she
her
referring to,
opinion.
David? What is she?
She was giving her
referring to?
opinion that it was racist.
No. What is she referring to, David? That is the question I'm asking you.
She was referring to the press coverage of Meghan Markle.
Yeah. So when she says that, she's not actually.
And
So David, when she
said
says
it was
that,
racist.
when
she
she
literally
says that,
said,
David,
let's call it what it is.
when she
it's
says
racist.
when she says that, is she referring to every press member that had anything to do with covering that story?
No, she's referring to her opinion of what she assumed it was.
She says she was torn to pieces, and the reason that the press in general tore her to pieces, was the word she used, is, let's call it what it is racism.
Right.
That's
he
exactly what
disagreed.
I said.
No, it's not.
And he
And he said, I don't think so.
severity to
He
disagree
said-
with her. She then called him white privileged.
Right. He said it's not racism, and he says you can call it that. He says it's getting really tiresome that everything's being called racism. And then she says, what troubles me about your statement is that you, as a white privileged male, have never experienced blah, 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 blah. And that's when he got into the, I can't help what I was. Now,
Exactly.
I'm kind of
Yeah,
like,
Dave,
that's how
I
it went.
disagree with him. I disagree with his assessment.
Yep.
I would agree with her assessment of the coverage, but after that, I'm on his side.
What for the calling him white privilege?
I don't know that it's racist, but I think that's a terrible. That's just basically her way of saying, guess what?
Honestly,
You're white,
that-
so I'm right.
John,
You get to be wrong,
Yeah,
and
John-
I get to be right.
John,
And I
John,
don't like that at all.
John, funny enough, I completely agree with you.
The idea that you can like target an ethnic group with a collective crime without taking
well, that's
into
not what. Well, that wasn't
taking
what was
into
being
account
done.
the individual's, you know,
That's I don't know how that comes into.
innocence
She
of
was just
guilt
saying.
or not is racist.
Sorry, John, you
Well,
think
she was just saying that the coverage was racist.
Hmm.
She
Yeah.
wasn't saying that man is racist.
No, she wasn't. She wasn't. She was saying the coverage was racist, and he was saying
Right.
it wasn't
wasn't.
racist.
Now, I
Yeah.
think it was. If you want to argue that point, I don't know if it was racist or not, but there was definitely something off about it.
we don't actually
Well,
need
if
to
you-
argue that
I'm
point.
qu-
We don't
I'm-
sorry, we don't actually need to argue that point because this has got nothing to do with white privilege. Well, it has something to do with white privilege, but regarding this specific
be fair,
challenge-
To be fair, I'd happily discuss what comments were made in the paper, and if you can point one out to me that was directly
you didn't see that
racist,
meme I saw, it was just that, there was all these, it was from the same paper, the Daily Mail, and it was Meghan and the other one, Kate. So it was from 2016, I believe, when Kate was pregnant, and she
Yeah.
was every picture was her holding, her baby bump,
yeah,
and it was Kate, the new mother preparing for her baby, and everything was a glowing headline.
I've seen that.
And and everything from Meghan was, what is this, some new fad? What is she doing? Blah 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 blah
Yeah,
blah.
but-
And I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah, but how can you attribute that to racism when no one even
Well,
mentioned the
what
race?
other reason? Well, what other bias do they have then against her?
Well, if you look at the royal family in general, I mean, no one got more shit than Fergie. Nobody, and she was white
well,
ginger.
that's fine. But in this particular side by side, why Kate?
You know
got a
what
different
Meghan
treatment?
Markle got was a fraction of what Lady Di got and Sarah Ferguson. A fraction.
Sorry,
That was
just
a
to be
different
clear,
press and a
just to
different
be
You know what I
clear,
mean?
you're going to use the media from 20 fucking years ago to make an inference about the media today.
I mean, to me, this is like when people
Well, of
bring up
course I
Timothy McVeigh. I don't want
course
to hear
I
about
am.
him either.
Do you think the media give it any of the royals an easy time?
From 20
They do
fucking years
sometimes.
ago, you're going to use
I'm
that as
talking
a
about
comparable.
now.
Just to
I'm
be
talking
clear,
about
Dave.
now. No, I'm talking about now.
Exactly, but you brought
well
up.
as
But
back
no,
then.
you're not talking
Gotta
about now
pray
because you
you-
brought up Diana,
Yeah, of course I did.
which isn't
I
now.
don't know
Talking
how
about
Diana
how the
got
press
treated.
was we not talking about how the press treat the royals?
Oh,
Well,
Was
I'm
was we
sorry.
not
just one
talking about?
I'm sorry.
example.
How has Prince Andrew torn a fucking new one for potentially being a pedophile?
What did you see him get torn a new one by the press?
No.
What did he do? Was he all fawning over him, telling him he was a great bloke?
How
Did you
did they
not see
cover
any
it?
criticism of it?
Dave, you do understand this isn't a binary, right?
Yeah.
So it's not
of course
one or
I
the
do.
other. It's not they either fucking glorify him or they fucking
Yeah,
crucify
of course I
him.
do.
Right? Okay.
That's my whole point.
Right. So how did they? What did they? Would you say that Jimmy Savile was crucified?
I'd say yes.
Well, he was dead,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Was David
After
Bowie?
he died, yeah.
Was David Bowie crucified?
Yeah, of course it was.
No, he wasn't.
What relation they
No,
got to
he
the
fucking
David Bowie
wasn't.
was
He was
crucified. Who
made
crucified
British. He was
David
made
Bowie
what
in the
British.
end?
relation? Sorry, what relation have they got to the royals?
To what? Sorry.
What's that got to do with that?
They've got
What's
nothing
that
to
got
do with the
royals?
royals, David.
do
I'm
with
just
the
pointing
royals.
out that
The press criticise people. They destroy people's lives sometimes. They
David,
pump people up sometimes.
David, you are arguing against the point I'm not defending. What I was trying to point out to you was that what they did with Andrew was they reported the news. They didn't bias it one way or the other. They just kind of said what happened, but didn't really try and spin it one way or the other. Okay? And this is what I mean.
Really?
And this is what I mean by it not being a binary. It's not either we love you or we hate you. It's that there are spectrums of this. Okay? So
Yeah,
Prince Andrew had allegations of pedophilia made against him. Now that's still an ongoing allegation, so it's alleged. Okay.
Yeah.
Now when
course.
the allegations against Jimmy Savile came out, do you recall how that came out? Was it given the same level of respect as that royal? I can tell you right now, it wasn't. And then if we're going to be looking at discrepancies in how people react to things or how society reacts to things, David Bowie is a great example. David Bowie was made one of the candidates for Britain's Icon of the Century. Now David Bowie historically slept with underage girls. He got them high, he groomed them, he got them high on drugs, and he fucked them.
How underage?
The youngest one I think was 12.
Ooh, okay.
This is all pretty well documented. In actual fact, they've given their own personal accounts of exactly what happened. Now, was he crucified? No, he was offered up as potential. He was actually offered up as potential candidate of icon of the century, British icon of the century.
You'll have to forward me that information about David Bowie.
We damn near had a statewide moment of silence.
Yeah.
Countrywide over here, we loved him.
David, if you want to know more about it, Google.
He was hailed as an anti-racist hero.
Yeah, David, Google baby groupies David Bowie. That'll give you everything you need.
Right. Okay.
I've never heard of that. He was hailed as an anti-racist kind of a.
Back to the point.
So yeah, I mean, he's fucking huge in the identity politics circle. Funny that, isn't it?
Can we go back to the point?
Yeah, we can.
Right. So the press.
He did warn you, tangents can and will happen.
Had more of a bias towards Meghan Markle than they did Catherine. Kate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at least as far as that particular instance goes, I can't speak for
they had more of a bias
time.
to them. But what was it racist? I don't
knows?
think so.
It was something. Now,
Was it
that 0.02% bias?
Sorry, can I come back on that? You said, was it racist? Dave, you've just asked, was it racist, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. No, but it was bias.
Well, bias is different, isn't it?
I agree with you, David. Remember back to that study I was referring to about the bias of tiles?
So from inferring that, then, you're saying the woman in the audience at Question Time was wrong to call it racist?
No.
Let's call it what it is. It's racism.
No, I'm not saying that.
That's exactly what she said.
Yeah, I agree that.
You don't think it's racism.
I agree that, David, but what I'm referring to is when she said racist, she wasn't referring to individual acts of racism. She was referring to institutional racism. You do understand they're not the same thing, right?
Yeah,
She was talking
the,
about the
the
bias without
charge,
saying it.
the
She used
charge
the
is the
wrong
same.
terminology.
The
Um,
This is a
charge is the
nitpick.
same.
I'm sorry. Say that again, David.
The charge is the same.
To you, it is.
No, whether it's an individual saying it or whether she's accusing maybe she should
David,
be
no, David.
more open in
David,
what
as I've
she's
been
trying
trying
to
to
say.
explain to you,
Maybe
David,
she
the
should have said
charge is not the
institutional rape.
same. Jesus Christ, the charge is not the
No,
same.
maybe
You
she
can't
should
look.
have said. Maybe she should have said that it was institutional racism, and I'd still disagreed with her.
She made the case for it being institutional, as I laid out at the beginning of this when we
She
got
said,
into
"Let's
it.
call it what it is. It's racism."
What?
And
No. What?
you
No.
even
What?
you
No,
even
Dave.
agree that it
Dave.
isn't.
What did I say? What did I say, Dave?
That you don't think it was racist.
No. What I said was, do we think she was referring to every person responsible for every piece of media being put out regarding her as being a racist? Do you think she was leveling that accusation against them? Do you think she was genuinely claiming that they were all racist? And we all agreed, that she wasn't.
That's what she said.
That she wasn't.
No,
And we all agreed
that's what she
that
said.
she wasn't.
Let's call it out what it is. Racism.
David, repeating the same thing again is not a counterpoint when I am literally explaining to you what we spoke about a moment ago.
Who was she referring to? Who was she referring to?
She was referring to the media, David.
What, all the media? Or just the media against
The coverage.
The coverage, correct.
Now, she felt the coverage was racist. Now, that's her opinion. That's the word she used.
Yeah.
I think it's a nitpick.
Let's call the coverage what it is.
Use that.
Racist.
Racist. Now, that's her. Now, she could have said bigoted. She could have said a lot of different words. I think we're arguing over terminology, which is a bit of a nitpick since we've kind of agreed in some kind of a forum on most
which is kind of why I didn't want
But
to
that's-
have
but
this.
that's the
Which
point,
is kind of why I
isn't it?
didn't want to focus on this part and wanted to move on to the next part, because we do agree here. Hello?
So anyway,
So she's racist. So she was wrong then to say racist.
Oh my God, David.
So she's wrong to say racist, and then when he said she was wrong to say racist, and she called him white privilege, he was right in what he said.
Oh, sorry, are we moving on to the next bit?
Well, I don't know.
I mean,
Do you know if
Her
I
opinion.
agree with you when you said so she was calling him racist?
No, I don't think she called him racist.
That's not what I asked, Dave.
No, but I don't think she called him racist. She said he was white privileged,
Okay.
and he said using that terminology,
Why do you think she said that?
calling someone who is obviously white that they don't understand because of their skin colour, which they can't help, is a racist thing to say.
Do you think Lawrence Fox has been a victim of institutional racism? Do you think in any part of his life he's ever experienced institutional racism?
I doubt it.
Do you think that might be because he's white?
Well, it could be.
Right. So
do you
think that was what she was talking about?
No,
Why is that?
I think she was using the term white privilege to tell him, quiet down. You don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, John. What do you think?
In layman's terms.
Okay,
Yeah?
John. What do you
that's
think?
what she was saying. Well,
Because he called her out by saying
That's-
it wasn't racism. She accused the press of being racist when she probably should have said, I think this was institutional racism. Or she probably should have said the press had more of a bias against her
I
than they
think
did
she
her,
kind of did
and
say
didn't
that.
have
She
to
said
bring
they
skin colour into
tore
it.
her to pieces, and she said the coverage, which tore her to pieces, was racist. That's her opinion.
Yeah,
Now,
that's fine.
I think it was something.
David, you just said that she was saying
she's in
something
town,
else.
so
John is saying that he disagrees with you.
She wasn't saying the whole press is racist. She wasn't saying anything of the sort. She was saying the coverage specific to Meghan she viewed as racist. She wasn't even calling the individuals who wrote the pieces themselves racist, just that she felt the coverage itself was racist was because there was a little extra added on, it was a negative light kind of a way, tore to pieces, which was
David,
cheap.
Lawrence Fox is an actor. David, Lawrence Fox is an actor. Do you think he's ever experienced negative press because of the colour of his skin?
Maybe not.
Maybe not, or probably not.
No, but what I'm saying is, you're assuming that Meghan Markle received negative press because of the colour of her
Are
skin.
you avoiding answering the question because you're worried about where it's going to go?
Not really, no.
Okay, so I'll ask again. Do you think Lawrence Fox has ever experienced negative press because of the colour of his skin?
Hard to say, isn't it?
Is
Hard
it?
to say. Well, yeah.
So you think the Guardian, the Daily
press...
Mail, the Telegraph, the Sun, what they've written potentially negative articles about him because he's white.
You could actually say the woman in the Question Time audience judged him on the colour of his skin.
No, you can't, for reasons that have already been explained.
Well, now.
Again with avoiding answering the question. Again with avoiding answering the question.
Go on, ask me again,
jump to the chase here.
Sorry?
Yeah, ask me again, man.
Yeah, sure.
Go on,
so
do
you think that Lawrence Fox has ever experienced negative press coverage in newspapers like The Guardian, the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Telegraph, the Financial fucking Times? I think they have a culture section. Do you think that any of the press that he's received has potentially been linked to the fact that he's white?
Because of the colour of his skin. Yeah. Everyone who reported that the Question Time incident.
Sorry?
He's saying this story. Everyone who reported.
I'm sorry.
Everyone who reported it and referred to white.
His answer is that yes, this recent story of the Question Time incident.
Oh, and you think that it's being reported because Lawrence Fox is white? Is that right?
Negatively.
No, just the reason it's being covered is because he's white. Oh no, sorry. Okay, yeah, actually no. Let's go with that. So hang on, Dave. You think that the coverage that's occurring right now is only happening to Lawrence Fox because he's white? Is that right?
That's like, that's like a.
It's a contributing factor, anyway.
It's a contributing factor. Okay.
Well, yes.
In what way do you think?
Factor, I mean, it's like you're framing the question as if it's just a single specific.
In what way do you think it's a factor? Like, what weight do you think it has to it? I'll put it like this: do you think that it would be being reported if Lawrence Fox was black?
Not in the same way, I don't.
It couldn't be, could it? It couldn't be reported in the same way because if Lawrence Fox were black, she wouldn't have called him white privilege, would she?
Well, of course you won't.
Exactly.
But if he was green,
it's almost as if
right privileged either.
It's almost as if it's being reported because this is a discussion about racial politics, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who brought the colour into it? Who brought the colour of someone's skin into it?
The media, according to the Question Time woman.
Well, no. The lady on Question Time did when she mentioned white privilege.
Well, she's assuming.
She was the one who brought the colour of skin into it.
No. Hold on, wait a second. Now, she's saying the media's bias was against someone of color. That's the initial charge of bringing the color of skin into it. Now, the chase we're cutting to here is that she said that he wouldn't understand, specifically because he's never experienced this
he's a white
unconscious
male.
Bias. Because he's a white male, he's never experienced this.
No, because he is experiencing white privilege. Because as she was arguing previously, the UK and specifically in this case the media has the issue of institutional racism.
Yeah, in her opinion.
In her opinion, yes, and in mine, and I'm advocating for that. And I'm trying to make the case for it, and you keep just repeating the same thing, saying that, like, oh no, she was saying this purely to him because... Because it's what an
She
act of individual
specifically-
racism.
Well, she said he can't understand because he's white
Exactly. She
privileged.
specifically targeted him as an individual,
Okay, David.
Because he didn't
Do you
agree with
think?
and then attributed
Yeah,
the
Dave,
collective white privilege
Yeah, no, I get
to
you,
him.
Dave. Do you think that you are in a position in any way to comment on childbirth in women and how painful it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
'Cause I was
How
there
would you
at
be able
both
to
my
do that?
children's births.
Sorry,
Not the specific pain, but the viewing of it.
but not the pain itself.
Although obviously not.
Okay. Or other factors? So? Do you think it would be appropriate for you to tell a woman about childbirth pain?
Yeah, I do every time I've got man flu. I tell her it's worse.
Okay, that explains a lot.
In a generalized.
But we understand that there are certain situations in which we can't comment on some things because they're not going to be a part of our lived experience. We get that, right?
Well, yeah, that's if you assume that no white person has ever been.
No, I'm
treated
talking
with
about the
racism.
general concept, David. We'll get to that. The general
So am I.
concept
Where
is
this
this.
is going.
Huh?
I don't like where this is going. Continue.
Yeah.
Of course I can't
Good.
comment.
Okay. So now we're going to take that
on what
concept.
it's like for a
We're now
woman
going to
be
take that
pregnant and
concept.
the pain she feels.
Sorry?
Yes, I can't comment
Right.
on a woman.
Well, you do,
and how she
or
feels.
you think it's not appropriate.
The pain she gets
Yeah.
when she's pregnant.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Because you're never
obvious
going to be able to
me.
experience it, are you? I mean, you can have facsimiles.
Exactly.
They've played around with it, haven't they? But you're never going to really experience it. You're never going to know what it's like to bring a child to term, carry that around for 9 months. That's not going to be something you're going to ever have to experience. So
Yeah, that's true.
yeah. So if we work on the assumption that the UK society does have institutional bias within it, and that bias is against minorities, and because of that bias, there is a preferential treatment of whites, for lack of a better way of putting it. Do you think it would be appropriate for a white person to comment on the experiences of a non-white person with regards to how they have been treated regarding their race?
Yes.
Definitely, if a white person has been racially abused, definitely.
Okay.
That's not the question he asked. But I
Depending
still
on the
say
individual.
Okay, but do you think that's what I asked?
Well, you generalise.
I'm not
he meant
generalising.
Other. Go ahead. Ask it again.
Because if I was you didn't make this claim when I said, do you think it's appropriate for you to comment on labour pain? Why do you think it's appropriate to make this comment now?
Yeah. Because
Why has it suddenly become relevant to you?
Because I physically can't feel the pain of pregnancy.
Okay.
But that's not to say that white people out there haven't felt the effects of racism.
So have
or haven't seen
you
it.
ever experienced the effects of being judged because of your race in Britain?
No, not really.
Okay.
I live in a predominantly white city.
Right. Do you think that might be your white privilege, maybe?
No.
No, you don't think it's because you're white and that you live in a society that
No.
preferentially treats
Because
white people?
I think if I lived somewhere else where it was majority black, say,
Yep.
like Hackney or somewhere like that, I probably would receive it.
Fantastic, David. I completely agree with you. So now you're starting to understand why, when we looked at the definition of white privilege, there was that nuanced term where it said in some societies, because it's talking about it being circumstantial, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is.
Right. So do we?
And it's relative to the individuals, where you live, what cultures you're living in.
I completely agree with you. Well done.
Yeah, but just because I haven't received where I live,
So
that doesn't mean I'm privileged.
bringing,
Just
actually,
a-
David, that is exactly what that means. You have the privilege of living in that community. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, that's exactly what that means, David. You have the privilege of living in that community.
What? a predominantly white city.
Yeah, and as such,
I
you
have the
and as
privilege
su-
of living in that city.
I'm sorry.
I have the privilege of living where I was born.
Yes, that is majority white.
Yeah. So
Whereas,
anyone who
whereas,
else is born
whereas,
wherever they are,
whereas, for example, if you were born in South Africa, you would not necessarily be majority white
correct.
because it's circumstantial, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, so you do have white privilege. You just in the UK
recognizing the
you
term
have
is
white
all.
privilege because you don't live in South Africa.
This is too much of a terminology debate.
Well, no, John, it really isn't because this is the point.
But
If
it's
look,
the
John,
reason
if
you're,
he can't
you're,
even
it's the
look, John,
reason
if
you're
he
getting
can't
hung
work
up,
with the
though.
terminology and doesn't understand the terminology, how the fuck are
No,
we meant to
it's
discuss it?
circumstance of where you live.
I agree with you.
White privilege is built on the assumption that everybody in say like Western societies.
Incorrect. Which is why I agreed with you
it
when you
is
gave
built
the
on that
example of the
assumption.
majority black community and living in that.
It is built on that assumption.
No, it is not. Again,
Well,
going
I
back
beg
to
to
the
differ.
original definition that we started with on Wikipedia, it is the social privilege that benefits white people over non-white people in some societies. I cannot make it any clearer to you, David, and if you can't grapple with this, I don't really see how we can carry on.
Well, to be fair, it's the idea you can target an ethnic group.
No,
with a
again, it is
collective
not,
pride.
because it is talking about some societies, not all societies with white people, not even all societies with majority white people. It is saying that in some societies where there is a preferential
colour
treatment,
in that particular society
Should really be called
is
majority
targeted
privilege.
as an ethnic. Exactly, it should be called majority or culturally. Why do you have to mention the skin colour? This is the thing. This is the point.
No, Dave, this is so not the point you've been making. You are
It
literally
is
just
the
latching
point.
onto it because it's the latest thing you can talk about.
I said that right at the
But
beginning.
actually, you know what?
I said that
You know
right
what?
at the
Can we?
beginning.
Can
It
we?
should be called
Could
majority
you
or
talk about
cultural
postmodernism
privilege.
and Marxism, please?
Seriously,
I
though,
said it right at the beginning.
What did you say?
when it says
Cultural-
that some
cultural
cultures and
majority.
some places, that's in every culture, not just white ones. So a good main point is, why is it singled out to be called white privilege?
Yeah,
That's
sure,
the point.
John, I can actually answer that because white privilege as a concept came about before the concept of intersectionality, and as a way of differentiating it as a core concept to kind of, because you have to break things down into core concepts and teach things in part, right? So like if you're going to learn how an engine's going to be made, you don't just tell someone how to build an engine with no context. You tell them what a carburetor is, you tell them what the cylinders do, you tell them what the crankshaft does. Yeah, makes sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you have to work with core concepts. So you have to work with base concepts. One base concept is this idea of white privilege. I talked about this in the original definition, which was to do with like ways of analyzing things. So you could look at society, say, through the lens of queer theory or intersectionality theory, which intersectionality theory would come out with different conclusions with regards to white privilege. If you analyze society through the lens of white privilege, are they all wrong and correct at the same time? No, because some of these analyses produce more useful results than others. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but with intersectionality,
sure.
the logical conclusion of intersectionality is the minority is the individual. It's not the homogenous group.
Yes,
that's the logical conclusion of it.
Yes, that is.
You take
that is
you take all the
intersectionality.
different
Yeah.
bits, and the logical conclusion is the minority is the individual. This was worked out years ago in the West.
I'm sorry, what?
And this is where people, the postmodernists, are trying to make it so that they do intersectionality so far and then forget about all the other things that can be split off as branches. And it works back to Martin Luther King's speech. Don't be judged by the colour of your skin, but the content of your character. Because not everybody is the same who's attributed to a certain group. That's the whole point. You
Someone would
see,
have to have made that claim first, but sure.
you know,
Um,
it's what splitting people into racial groups and ethnicities.
no,
Yeah,
well, that
the
was interesting because he was
intersectionality.
talking about the root of it, and I'm just curious though, if white privilege is technically, although not called that, majority privilege, and so like say my white privilege, quote unquote, wouldn't exist in not in some non-white countries and or cultural areas. And if you're saying that the reason it gets called white privilege is it has its roots in all the stuff you said, does that mean that everywhere else that there is a majority privilege, we're pretty much getting the rap for it?
Are you asking me, John? Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, I would argue that if you were going to analyze, if you were going to look at that, looking at it through an intersectional view would yield more useful results.
What would the answer be?
Depends which one you're talking about.
Well, I'm just saying, like,
Intersectionality
if
is like
if the
limitless.
privilege has its roots in white culture somehow, if there's a privilege in
No,
Japan,
John. Sorry, we need to be specific here. With regards to white privilege, that is looking at the specifics of things like European colonialism, Atlantic slave trade, and like the British Empire.
so what do they call the privileges in other countries where they're not white?
Could you give an example?
In Japan.
Okay, Japan. So you would like look at it in intersectional terms potentially. So the influence of like the US, the interference of the US with respect to what Japan could and couldn't do. They basically told Japan that you now have to open your borders and freely trade, essentially. And I think that was backed by the British Empire. So what you'd have to look at is what actually happened in that time period and how it altered Japanese culture and society, and then
Well, first of all, they didn't want other people in, so then that's right away like a very nationalistic approach to it.
Sorry,
Matthew, can you see how you connected white privilege with colonialism and empires?
David, can you see how when I asked for an example,
the idea that you can target an ethnic group with a collective crime without taking into account the individual's specific innocence or guilt?
David, where did I suggest a crime occurred? Where did I pass judgment on literally anything? Or did you? Or did you only? Sorry, David. Or did you only half listen? Did you only half listen to what I said? Heard a couple of trigger words, and then just started with this narrative.
I'm assuming that you're talking about that as a negative.
No, I never said one way or the other.
Well, which way is it then?
As I said, you would probably look at that point in period in time, because that had a huge transformative effect on Japan and its culture. It was at the time feudal, and then it became mercantile, and then it became industrial. And in so doing, it benefited different fringes of that formerly feudal society. So it will have disproportionately benefited some members of that society over others.
So is that good or bad?
Well,
is that good or bad?
Well, have I made any claim as to which is good and which is bad, or have I explained to you how and why you would use an intersectionality framework to look at that?
I'm just trying to figure out if everywhere, any example I could come up with would somehow come down to the white man passed it on to him.
Well, the issue there, John, is...
Are there cases where that's not the case?
Unfortunately, colonialism was pretty rife in Europe. And
I'm not saying it wasn't.
Successful.
I'm saying
so if you're asking me, John, if you're asking me where Wakanda fucking is, I don't know.
All I'm saying is, in a country where my white skin wouldn't give me a privilege, where the privilege would go to the natives of that country.
Yeah, I would argue potentially South Africa, but you have to kind of adjust it for the fact that they had apartheid for a significant chunk of their history.
I'm just saying, pick anywhere, pick any country, pick somewhere in Central America or South America, pick Brazil, pick Bangladesh. I don't really care where you pick.
Actually, yeah,
I
okay,
don't
let's
think
go
being
with,
white would.
well, again, all of these are examples that have, like, been formed from fucking colonialism, John. Like,
Well, can you pick one that's not? You know the history of that better than I do.
oh, do I know of one? Okay.
Yeah, well, that has not been affected by us, and yet they still have a privileged majority, where they view their own as better than maybe the minority.
That's a good question.
Matthew, I'll ask you a question. Do you think in general, when people talk about colonialism, they're doing it in a negative sense or a positive one?
I have no idea because it depends who I'm talking to.
No, but in general.
Again,
Because
like, it depends who I'm
if I've
talking
got to be honest, if I've got to be honest, whenever I see it like on social media, from the majority of the time, it's done in a negative sense.
Well, my question there would be, what?
A lot of the time,
sorry, my question there would be,
it's connected to white privilege.
What do you consider as negative, David?
Well,
The treatment of the peoples is what's viewed as negative.
Okay, can you think of a single example where a technologically superior culture has interacted with a technologically inferior society and it's gone well?
Which is why I know we'll never be visited by aliens.
But,
sorry, Sorry, Dave. What did you say?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Well, there we go.
But that's in the initial contact. And that was relevant for.
Sorry, your feed has actually gone quite quiet, Dave. Could you speak up a little?
Yeah, I've had to step the AirPods out as I've run out.
Oh.
So you're actually on loudspeaker now.
Okay. All right. So
continue.
Uh,
You were asking something. Go on.
Me?
Yeah, you are. So
yeah. I just the way I see it on social media, it's always negative. There's no positives to it.
Oh, sorry.
You can cherry pick history all the way back to the Romans.
David, most of my conversations regarding colonialism have not occurred on Facebook or social media.
No, I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking in general.
Yeah, David, you asked me earlier. If in general what my experience of it has been.
And how it's attributed. No, I was asking your opinion.
Yeah, and I gave it.
I would say negatively.
Yeah, and I'm
yeah. Okay. So you think it's negative on?
I'd be a better person to ask, because as the American, colonialism is not something that gets discussed like here around town or any of my American friends. So all of my discussions about colonialism have been with people from Europe, and it's been overwhelmingly viewed as negative.
Guys, can I just interrupt for 1 second quickly? I need to go and give my dog an insulin shot. So, are you guys okay are you okay to talk with John regarding your questions regarding colonialism for a little while?
No
sure.
problem.
Yeah. Just so you know, I got about 45 minutes.
No worries. I'll be back in a bit. Enjoy, guys.
All right. See, you're right about that, though. I agree with you that colonialism is not viewed in a good light, and it is what is being, by the definition, and that's kind of what I was kind of asking, is that it's being blamed for this whole white privilege thing. And so I'm kind of asking, because I don't think it's a white thing. I think it's a majority thing, like it said. And in different countries, different majorities have a different privilege. And I've had that confirmed from friends that I know. And so I'm just trying to kind of wonder, is that whole theory of privilege being blamed on us?
Yes, that's what I think. I think that colonialism was of its time. Everyone was doing it.
I mean, what are you supposed to do? I mean, that's why. What do you?
Around then.
I don't know what you're supposed to do. I don't know if I would have done any different. You roll up on people, and you've got advancements, and people who are living what you were living like hundreds of years ago. You kind of want to, show them a better way. You feel right about it, but then you're also thinking, well, you can't just put them in charge.
Yeah.
They don't know how to be in charge yet. You got to kind of lead the way for a little while. The treatment could have been a lot better, but for the time, I mean, I don't know if I would have reacted much differently.
Well, most Americans have got a bit of lime here, haven't they?
I don't view colonialism in a bad way, because without colonialism, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now, living where I'm at right now. part of your
This is what I'm
expansion.
saying. I mean, America's got a relatively short history as far as North America's concerned,
Right.
whereas like Britain has got a longer history, going back like 4,000 years and what have you. Been
Mhm.
conquered by the French, the German tribes, the Italians. When it was
Oh, we've definitely
ancient
imported a
Rome.
lot of our ideas over there. We're good for that.
All that was of its time. None of
Yeah,
that
I
stuff
mean,
that went on
but
back then
it's a
has got
popular
anything
practice
to
these
do.
days. It's a very popular practice these days to go back and look at history and judge it by the standards of today.
Yeah, but it should never
It's
happen like
very,
that.
very popular. You know one of the things that shocked me the most as an American was when I started in the UK groups was how people vilify Churchill. Like over in this country, he's a great man.
Yeah,
Over there, he's like a piece of shit for some reason.
yeah.
I don't understand it, but it freaked me out at first when I saw people giving him the business. I was like, wow, that's a great man. Like, held you through and no one else was there and you were getting your shit bombed and he stood up and you're calling him all this horrible crap. I didn't get it, but yeah, whatever.
Yeah, no, that's true. But that's like I can assure you, a lot more people over here that like respect Churchill.
Well, I hope
You know,
so.
yeah, they do. They respect him for what he did. You know, but
'Cause
it boils down to the one thing: nobody's perfect. You'll always
you're
be
right.
able to find some criticism with someone for something they did or said, and you'll always be able to pick a point in history where something bad happened.
Yeah, but then can you have no heroes? I think I posted a video about that once. Majid Nawaz asked one of these radical feminist women, I forget her name,
Yeah,
who can you look up to? Who can be a hero by these standards? Basically, and she basically had to say nobody.
yeah. I mean,
You can't have any
it's
heroes
strange.
anymore. You can't look up to anybody because nobody's going to be perfect. These purity tests are getting out of hand.
Mm, I agree. It's hard, but you have got to look at things more objectively. And I truly, honestly believe we've got to steer away from like identity politics and
Well,
political
I
correctness.
was I was brought up in the not colorblind generation, where you were like you're kind of making a case for individualism, which is how I was brought up to treat each person as who they are, not based on the color of their skin. But you understand that's considered racist now.
Yeah, no, I can't compute that in my head. Why
It
anyone
is.
would
It's
consider that
considered
racist?
racist. Nope. Because you're supposed to take into account a person's skin color and what they've gone through, and then empathize with that and agree with them, which is why the guy on Question Time got the business, because he was supposed to just, and this is the case I believe Matthew's making, he hasn't experienced it. She was telling him of her experiences or what she thought based on someone who has, and he's supposed to just roll over and say, oh, well, I guess you're right.
Yeah, but anyone who's been paying attention for the last 2 decades can see that the racist card has been used over and over and over again.
Not as
Many
much as it
times.
is now, but it's
Yeah,
getting
no,
some things are escalating though. You
yeah,
can't
that's what I'm
fault
saying.
people
It's
for that because
escalating. It's
things are
getting to a
escalating.
point where
But
people end up doubling down rather
it's
than accepting,
escalating
oh,
on
hang
a
on a
lot of
minute.
different ends though. Now see, I don't know how familiar you are with American history. Do you remember the Rodney King stuff in
Yes,
the 90s?
96.
You do.
Yeah,
Right. Okay, so there was the video of that. Okay. So but think about this. He only got beat, but he lived. These days, shot in the head for pulling away. So things have gotten a little different.
yeah. But don't you think,
So you can't blame people for being on a little bit more high alert. I agree the racist card's thrown around
yeah,
way
but
too much and
what
on
I'm
very
saying is,
innocuous things.
don't you think that's engineered by people splitting people into groups and pitting them against each other? Those white people have got white privilege. They've got a better
Well,
advantage than you. This is what they're
that
getting told.
is a
Then they think,
deep.
oh, you've got white privilege. That means you're racist. Blah blah blah.
Well, that's
You
a
know.
deep rabbit hole that has to do because the class wars wasn't working. This is the new way of class war,
Yeah,
and a
exactly.
lot of it in America started because when the welfare checks started coming around, they started telling the young black women, if you don't have a man in the house, we're going to give you this free money,
Yeah,
and that helped widen the income gap, and so a disproportionate amount, not saying there's not poor white people, but a disproportionate amount of our African American communities are destitute or poor, below the poverty line. And class warfare is a very unpopular topic. Saying let's go after the rich and we're the poor is not a popular political line. And they had to
no,
invent something else. So I think that's why they've started using the white privilege thing.
no. We've still got class war
Hey,
over
I'm back,
here.
guys.
We've still got class war over here.
Yeah,
There seems to be a resentment towards the rich.
it's
You know,
it's considered an unfair tactic over here.
But whether you've built yourself, because that's because of the American dream, isn't it? Like, but whether
I
you've built
suppose.
yourself up from nothing, you could have come from a council estate and made your
Right.
money from working really hard. But then
You'll
you're
abandon it.
classed because you have X amount of money as being the rich, and then there's like a divide between the poor and the rich.
John, can I ask something quickly?
You can ask me whatever you want.
Yeah, sorry, going back to what you were talking about regarding like the class warfare and how that didn't work, and so it became this white privilege thing.
Mm.
Do you remember when we talked about like Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, and then I pointed out that the thing that's often forgotten is what he did next?
Yeah, and I was talking about specifically, it was when Obama had got reelected. It was on his major, and at this point, I was a big lefty. I'm talking about big lefty. So I'm following, and he was going to do it too. That was a major thing on his mind. It was income inequality. That was going to be priority number one, and they went after him, and it was not even maybe a couple months he bailed on it, and the left was pissed.
Yeah, sorry.
Because they started calling it class warfare, and class warfare doesn't work.
Yeah,
The
John.
white privilege
John, sorry.
works.
What I was trying to ask was, where does the white privilege, where in the timeline of class warfare, moving over to white privilege, does Martin Luther King and the human rights? Sorry, the.
Oh, I'm just talking about as a political argument.
Yeah, but what time
Now.
frame are you talking about? Because I'm a little confused.
Within the last maybe, I want to say.
I say 20 years.
Yeah, sorry,
Well,
hang on, what?
I say from about
income
the 80s.
income inequality was a
80s,
term that was
90s.
being used for the last while,
The
and it still
40
gets
years,
used a lot, but it gets called class warfare if anyone takes it seriously.
Who calls it class warfare?
The right.
Oh, okay.
If anyone in the because income inequality is a term you can kind of handle, and they don't mind when Bernie Sanders says it because everyone thinks there's no chance he'll get elected, which is true. But I remember specifically when Obama, and they'll talk about income inequality, but anyone tries to push it as an agenda, it gets called class warfare. Otherwise, it just gets dismissed almost. In our news anyway, news coverage. Class warfare is not a popular topic. Income inequality, no one minds talking
Yeah, it's
about.
almost as if there's an economic privilege mechanic at play.
Well,
Where
and
those
that's
with
where it
the
goes
most
back to the
capital
point.
have
That's
the
why
most
they,
say.
that's why they've attached it and called it a white privilege, because it's disproportionate. The non-white communities disproportionately are the unwealthy.
Wait, so
That's
hang on a minute. The right are
not true
using
statistics,
bourgeoisie propaganda to disenfranchise the poor? Say it ain't so.
You would think, right?
That's exactly what you've just described.
The highest income earners are Asian, both in America and
Well,
in
they're
the
not
UK.
trying to disenfranchise them. They're trying to perpetuate the pull up your bootstraps, work hard, and achieve the American dream angle.
I mean, that always made me laugh, because the idea of picking yourself up by your bootstraps is meant to be an absurd statement.
It's actually harder than it's made out to be.
Well, it's not
the
just
way our system
It's
works.
not
over
harder,
here
it's
is-
impossible, John, because how could you possibly pick yourself up by your bootstraps?
Well, it's a metaphor, but yeah.
It's a
I get what
metaphor
you're
to
saying.
show the absurdity of that claim.
It's not meant to, but you can take it that way, I'm sure.
No, John, that is actually the root of that term.
If you want.
No, it's
That's
not if
how
I
it's
want.
used.
That's how etymology works. The term comes from it being an absurd argument.
It is not used.
I know
as an
it's
absurd
not
argument.
used correctly, but that doesn't change the fact You know the expression that's entered common usage, blood is thicker than water, to suggest that family is more important than friends. It's actually part of an
Yes.
older and longer phrase, which is blood is thicker than water, but the blood of the covenant is greater than the thickness of than the waters of the womb.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Which means the covenant that we make with people as friends is greater than who we're related to. So it's actually the complete opposite of how people use it. Yeah?
And that's from what?
I believe it was like a common 17th century phrase.
So we're not going back to like original biblical times.
No. We're just talking about etymology.
Well, anyway.
Because if we were going back to biblical times, we'd be talking about fucking Hebrew. Like. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, John.
I forget where I was going now.
Well, no, I just mean the bootstrap narrative. Like you were talking.
Oh,
you were
well,
talking
no, the
about
one they're
like
trying
what the
to-
right's doing. Yeah.
Well, because you said, are they trying to disenfranchise the poor people? That's not the way they're trying to make that message about. They're trying to make
Yeah,
the
John.
message
Of course
that,
they're not.
you know,
because
being
they
handed
lose.
free stuff from the government is not the way to go. The way to go is to do for yourself.
Yeah, spoken like someone who's drunk the Kool-Aid and swallowed the bourgeoisie propaganda.
Just saying.
I know you're just saying. I'm just saying.
As opposed to the proletariat propaganda.
What's the
It's the same thing you hear over in the UK. You know that Corbyn wants to give it all away or give everyone everything. or
What's the
something of that nature.
proletariat propaganda, Dave?
That's the poor, the bourgeoisie, and the rich.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that propaganda?
it's the constant battle between rich and poor.
Yep. That's correct.
Yeah.
Is that propaganda?
Well, it depends. It depends how someone's depicting it.
Okay, but when a rich person tells you you need to continue behaving in a way that means I stay rich, you buy that story, do you?
Yeah. In what way?
Oh, you might be able to.
What rich
Dave, you
person
might be able to.
saying
You
that?
might be able to become like me one day, right? Because you can pick yourself up by the bootstraps. If you work hard enough, you
No,
can
what
be
I'm saying
anything.
is
You can
what
be
way
anything,
do rich
David.
people say that
And
to
I am
people?
saying that, yeah, of course, the bourgeois are going to fucking tell you that. No?
No.
No,
Because-
go on, okay.
Give me an example of a rich person who's telling that to someone.
Telling what?
Telling them what you said.
Oh, pretty much every Republican senator that there's been. Since
No,
Reagan.
Oh, it's a.
I'm talking
I mean-
about.
Reagan.
genuine
All right,
rich
Thatcher.
people
Thatcher.
who
There you go,
employ
Dave.
people.
Thatcher.
It's like a symbiosis. Not everybody is capable of like running a company because it goes back to intersectionality.
Right.
Because
But-
a lot of people are only
Oh, I think you. I
proposed
think you
to
might.
doing work because
I think
they haven't.
you might be coming to a
It's not in their
realization.
nature to do it.
I agree with you.
So
I'm only
to
saying
break-
that's the
to break
popular
that down
narrative,
into
not that any
propaganda
one person
it's
is
the
saying
rich
that to
man
one
telling them.
individual.
Yeah, I heard you, John, but Dave, I'm afraid I couldn't hear you. So what did you say?
It goes back to you saying the rich man their propaganda telling them to they've got to work for them to make them more rich.
You're a believer in the free market, I take it, Dave.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So, like, by that, the market should be as little regulated as possible and stuff like that.
Depending on what the regulation, I think it needs regulation. Yeah.
Okay, so we're not talking about free market?
Well, no, of course we are. You can have a free market and still be regulated.
No.
Yeah, you can.
How?
Because all the free markets of the world now are regulated.
But they're not free markets. They're regulated markets.
Well, it depends what they're regulated. They're free to trade with whoever they want.
Dave, what does the term free market mean to you?
It means being able to trade.
Okay. Does it mean being able to trade?
It means being able to
Does it mean
come from wherever you want.
trade whatever you want? Fantastic. Tell me, can you currently?
I said come from wherever you want. You can be poor. You could have inherited money. but you have got the ability, if you've got the innovation and the idea to create something to sell to whoever.
Dave, a moment ago you were saying that not everyone has the ability to do that.
No, no, everyone has the opportunity, but
Oh,
not everyone has
okay.
the ability.
Everyone has the opportunity. Okay. Who do you...
Yeah, but not everyone has the ability.
Yeah, okay. So, do you think that that kind of model and system benefits those that already have capital? More so than it does people who have no capital, or barely any.
Yeah, but there's many reasons why people have capital.
Dave, that's not what I
There's
asked
many
you.
reasons.
Dave, that isn't
Yeah,
what I
but
asked
there's
you.
many reasons. Yeah, but it's not as simple as you're trying to make it.
How am I
It
trying,
really
Dave?
isn't.
How am I trying to make it?
Because you're framing it as though it's a one answer question.
Well, that
A
question
one-word
is a
answer or
one-answer
one
question,
sentence
Dave.
answer.
You don't know what, but so you don't know how I'm framing it. You don't know where I'm going to take it. You're just refusing to answer the question.
Well, answer the question again.
Okay.
Ask
Do
the question
you
again.
think that the free market as a model disproportionately benefits those who already have capital?
No.
No. Okay. So you think that the average person is just as able to say make 100 million? No, actually no. Is able to make $1 million
Come on.
is just as likely as someone able to is just as likely as to make £1 million as someone who inherits an estate that brings an income of $1 million a year.
Okay, right. Well, in those circumstances, yes.
Okay, so I'll ask
But
again,
that's
David.
not a
I'll ask
full
again,
picture of
David.
it.
Do you think that the free market disproportionately benefits the wealthy?
The wealthy.
Sorry, I'll rephrase. I'll go back to what I was originally saying. I couldn't stop laughing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you think it disproportionately benefits those with capital versus those without?
Well, it depends where they got the capital from in the first place.
Okay, so
So if it was inherited, then yeah, obviously you've got the money, you've got the backing. You're obviously you're going to be a step higher.
mm-hmm.
You know, that's circumstance, isn't it?
Sure.
That's all that is. That's circumstance.
Sure.
So it's obviously going to benefit them.
Yep. Any other examples?
Everyone's got the opportunity.
What about if
to
you
start from the ground and work their way up?
I'm sorry?
Everybody's got the opportunity to start from nothing and work their way up.
Do they?
Well, yeah. But it depends on intersectionality again. How well you listened at school, or what your family surroundings were like.
What about for people who are born with like severe cognitive impairments? Do you think that they have that same level of opportunity or accessibility?
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
But yeah,
so we've gone from saying we've gone from saying that everyone
that?
has the opportunity to saying that
Whose
yeah, everyone
fault
has
is
the
that?
opportunity, but some are like not going to necessarily be suited to this
Well, it depends
this socio-economic food chain.
Well, it depends. It depends how much what sort of cognitive disability you have. There's many different levels of it.
I agree.
So you're picking specifics from one end of the scale to the other.
No, I'm just
In
no,
general-
David. All I'm getting at here is that there are things that come into play that interfere with the notion that anyone has the opportunity to achieve what you're suggesting. Now, another example I would give is that if you already have, do you think that rich people are better able to influence politics?
Oh, definitely, lobbyists.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
Fantastic. Good. So do you think that it's possible to have a democracy where everyone's vote counts under
No.
under free market capitalism?
No, but it wouldn't work under socialism either.
Is that the only alternative, David?
No, wouldn't work under communism.
Is that the only other alternative you can think of, David?
No, it wouldn't work under any system.
Social democrat? Would it work under a social democrat model?
No.
Why not?
It wouldn't. Because under a social democrat model, it's still working on the free market capitalism.
Oh, okay. So, social democrats, just as a by the way, means that anyone who works for a company has a say in how that company's run?
Right.
So
What? So name a company then where everyone has an equal say.
there's a number of companies in Germany because of how their union system operates.
Right. So name one then.
Huff.
So Hoff don't have a CEO. They don't have any hierarchical structure. It's the people that decide, the workers.
The say of the people of the board, I think, is what you're getting at. They have a board, and it is a public company, so they have shares. Um, so if you have, say, 8 members of the board, you will have the equivalent number of union reps at all board meetings. And when it comes to deciding the direction of that company, the vote of the union reps is equal to the vote of the board members. So the power discrepancy generated by the controllers of capital is somewhat is mitigated via a social democrat model. Do you have a problem with that?
How does that benefit anyone outside of the company?
Well,
Does it
because
benefit anyone outside of the company?
yes.
Are they under the same rules of the system as in the governmental system?
Well, sorry, I don't quite understand what you're asking.
What I'm trying to say is, so union reps go in there and they have equal say in the board, but is there a hierarchical system from top down in that company?
Well,
Is there a boss
yeah,
of the company?
David, the one I just laid out, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a CEO of the company.
So they have a board. This is how business works. If you don't understand how,
Yeah.
sorry, if you don't
understand
how public companies work, we're going to have a problem with this discussion, David.
Well, it's not a case of understanding how public companies work, is it?
David,
David,
if we're having a discussion about different ways one can run a public company and its impact on its impact on whether or not it enfranchises or disenfranchises someone, yeah, you're going to have a bit of a working knowledge about how that works.
No, it wasn't about that.
It's exactly what it was about, my friend.
No, we was talking about governmental systems.
Okay, so I said to you social democrat.
You said, does any system work?
And I said to you social democrat. You said it wouldn't work because what was the reason you gave?
Social democrat as a public company, but not a government. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that the government, when it forms laws.
So it's not a public company then? I mean,
no, David, I think you've misunderstood what I was saying. I was showing you how private business can conduct itself under a social democrat model.
Right.
And you asked for an example, and I gave you an example of Germany.
Yeah.
And I explained to you.
What did you say the company was?
Huff.
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 No.
What do they produce?
Huff.
Yeah, Huff. What do they produce?
Huff. There is an umlaut over the U. So how you're pronouncing it is incorrect. Okay?
Do they produce?
They produce prefab homes.
Okay. And there's an owner of that business.
There's a what?
An owner of the business, yeah?
I'm still not hearing you. I still can't hear you.
There's an owner of the business.
An owner of the business.
Owner.
Yeah. Okay. If it's okay, Dave. If it's a public company, how does one gain ownership of that company?
Someone had to have started the business, didn't they?
I'm sorry?
Someone had to have started it. Did you say private or government business?
Did I say grant or government business? You need to speak up, mate. You need to speak up. I can't hear you.
Private.
Private or what?
Government.
Or public. What do you think I mean when I say public? Because I think what you're actually asking is private or state-run.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what
this is not state-run. However, it is a public business, as in the business has gone public as in it can be traded on the stock exchange.
Yeah.
Does that all make sense? Is it a
Yes.
private business? Yeah.
Right.
You understand how all
And
those?
everyone who
You
works
understand
there,
how
and
all of that
and
can
everyone who works
exist at
there.
the same time? Yep.
And yes.
Okay,
And
cool.
everyone who works there gets an equal say in that company.
Their union rep, who represents the interests of those that work there. Yeah, sure.
So like most union reps have a say.
The number of
There's-
union
there's-
reps on the board equal the number of board members.
And what benefits does that give?
It allows the. It means that the privilege. Sorry, let me rephrase. It means that those who are majority shareholders in the company and so have become board members or have been elected board members by majority shareholders, it means that the power that they wield over the direction of that company is essentially equal to the power of the workers that operate within that current company.
50-50.
Yeah, if you like.
So if the company decides, how far does that go within the company? What decisions?
Well,
Every decision?
so like if there's a decision to not give a pay rise, so for example, and that would get voted on. If there's if they decide that, well, we're going to actually increase the amount of profits that we're putting into the savings of the company for let's say like expansion or upgrading of equipment in the company. Let's say like there's going to be this is what board members do when deciding like how companies operate, how much to charge for their product, or like where to source their materials from, if there's ways of refining how they make their product.
And the employees and all the staff and the union reps, what's the distribution of capital they've got in that company?
What's the distribution of capital that they have in that company? I mean, do you consider the influence that they have on their union rep as a distribution of capital?
No, what I'm trying to get my head around is, when you have a company, someone somewhere down the line has put capital into that company.
Yes,
for say new machinery. It isn't the actual workers and everyone has all clubbed together.
Oh,
and put money
oh,
in.
okay. Sorry, I didn't realize I was actually going to have to explain this. Okay, so the factory that let's just take a factory. It doesn't matter what it produces, but it produces widgets. Okay, those widgets make a profit. So the resources that come into that factory to make the product that comes out, the cost of that and the cost of what you pay the workers it needs to be less than the widget that comes out and people buy for that company to make a profit. Is that right? That okay? With me so far, Dave? Hello? 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 Fuck, I think the audio's gone dead. I know.
I'm still here for what it's worth.
Hey, man. Dave, are you still here?
It looks like he is.
Yeah, is he? Is his icon like? Are you hit? Can you hear him?
No. I could up until a second ago.
Yeah, you kind of cut out. I've sent him a message over the group chat, but he's sent it.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Anyway. Oh, he can't hear us. Okay.
He can hear us.
You know what?
It's unfortunate I can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to end the call and then I'm going to bring it back in, okay?
Okay.
Hey, David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear now.
Fantastic. Just waiting on John. Well, John was listening, but I think he's just kind of hanging about. Yeah, so a factory's churning out widgets. The money it generates comes from the profit margin of the products it buys versus the products that it sells. Who gets the money? There's a number of different ways that that gets distributed. So, have you got something playing in the background?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, like.
No, it's okay.
No,
It's my daughter.
it's no problem. So, like, there's various ways that those funds can be distributed, but let's pretend that it goes to the owner of the factory and that there's one owner and that they paid for the entirety of that factory and all of that got done. The factory owner gets those profits. They pay a wage to their labor force. Now they decide what to do with those profits. They might choose to give everyone a pay raise if it's a particular pay rise if it's a good time, or they may decide to save some of that money and put it to one side to expand the company. Now, eventually, some companies get to the point where some businesses that have been set up like this get to the point where they're so big and so popular that they could justify massively expanding their operating structure. And generally, when companies do want to do this and they want to generate large amounts of capital to do this, they make their companies public. By making their company public, they are offering stock shares on the stock exchange. Make sense?
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, so when people buy those stocks, that money is going to the owner of that company, yeah?
Yeah.
They use that money to then invest in expanding however it is that they operate, and that's the gist of how that company works.
Yeah, I understand that.
If enough people buy it, depending on how it being public is structured, because some companies have like some companies basically it's set up so that there is a single owner who has a majority share, say 51%, and that's to prevent it from, when it goes on the market, the company being bought out from under whoever set it up. So with regards to what capital do the workers in the Huff factory have, like what capital do they have in the factory? It's really hard to kind of explain, to put a figure on that. They have a say in how that company is run, which I would argue has a type of capital value. So I don't know.
But the employees don't have the risk that the owner has.
Well, they do, because
in capital.
Oh,
their jobs are at stake. Their jobs are at stake. Yes, but
yeah, I'd say
in capital,
you're correct.
So, although they'll have a say on their working conditions, wage, like most companies do, like my company does.
Yep.
They're not in charge of the company.
Well, I mean, under a social democrat model, they have a say. I don't know if I'd call it in charge, but they do have a vote.
Most people in unions, in companies, do have a say, or at least it's a negotiable. It's a negotiable.
Sorry, could you turn down the audio of whatever you're watching?
It's alright. Just turn it down. Is that better?
That is.
You see, that's the point I'm trying to make. At some point, whatever business it is, you're taking it to a scale where it's like global, but the majority of businesses aren't like that.
Huff isn't a global business. It's
exclusively
operates.
It's floated on the market.
It's exclusively operates in Germany.
Yeah.
And
it's floated on the market.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, that's correct.
Yeah. Well, most businesses are small businesses. They can't, this is where deregulation wouldn't be bad. This is an instance of
Sorry,
where we're
David.
dealing.
David, when you say most business, what are you using
Yeah,
as a metric to decide what is?
SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses.
So
Like,
are you talking about in terms of what they contribute to GDP, or are we talking about like individually?
no, I'm just individually as
Ah, okay.
businesses.
Do you not think that the companies that contribute the most to GDP and how they are allowed to operate are due greater scrutiny?
Yeah, they are. They're the ones that need the regulation. It's the other ones that don't need as much regulation because they haven't got the capital to have big HR departments and things like that.
Okay, so I'm advocating for a social democrat model being introduced into the UK. You okay with that?
Um,
To rein in companies like Amazon and so on.
well, that's what governments do anyway. That's what.
No.
Well, well,
The last guy,
they do get
sorry, I hate to
regulated.
break it to you, but the last guy that was advocating for this was called a Marxist.
Well, it depends how far you want to go. But most companies are regulated, i.e., workers'
Not as
rights,
social democrats, and
holiday.
you can talk about workers' rights if you want, but we haven't seen a pay rise in 15 years in real terms.
Well,
So
I've
where
seen,
are
I've
the
seen.
workers' rights being protected exactly,
Well,
David?
well, I've seen 3 in the last
In
4 years.
real terms.
For me, yeah.
In real terms, David, do you understand what I mean when I say real terms?
For me, yeah.
For
In
you.
real terms, I've got more money than
So
what
you
I
don't
did have.
understand what I mean. In real terms is
No,
referring to
no.
the
In
purchasing.
real terms,
Fuck's sake.
in real terms, for me, I have more money than what
Yeah,
I would
David,
have
I
had.
understand. Repeating the term in real terms doesn't convince me that you understand what real terms means.
You're talking about in relation to inflation
Y-
and stuff like that.
yes. So just to be clear,
Yeah,
you have sat
yeah. So
down and checked whether or not your pay rise was in line with inflation? Have you sat down and
no, it was actually above
it
inflation
was above inflation? What, all three times
all 3
by the
times.
same proportion?
Because what's the inflation rate within the last 4 years?
It fluctuates. I think it's been sitting around 1.5. Generally, that's what governments try to keep it at. I'll have a look.
Well,
Also,
mine
hang
was
on. If
two
you're
point
saying in the
two point
last three
five
years, when
percent.
did you last get a pay rise?
We get one every year in April.
So, hang on a minute. You were asking me what has the inflation rate been after claiming that you have adjusted for inflation on your wage increase. Do you understand the problem with that statement? Because it makes it sound
No.
like you were talking out your ass.
Well, honestly, it's like you keep flitting from one thing to another.
No, I don't. I try to
Yeah.
keep you on point,
What?
David, and I hold you,
No.
and I show you the courtesy of listening to you when you're talking, and I use what you say to formulate a discussion. Okay, and I've been very patient with you and taken your comments seriously, but you jump around. You jumped from postmodernism to Marxism, and if you knew fuck all about either, you would understand the absurdity of that statement.
Honestly, do you know how condescending you come across?
Do you know how stupid you come across?
It's like you come across condescending. It's like it doesn't matter what anyone says. It's like, do you understand this? Do you understand that? It's like I'm talking to some sort of school teacher or something,
Yeah,
not as an individual.
David, I've been talking to you for the last how many?
2 hours,
2 hours, right? And
and you've been like that. You've been like this right from the
repeatedly, I've had to bring you back to things you have said previously to have a fucking clue what you're talking about. I've asked you to elaborate on stuff, and when you go to elaborate after the next sentence, you start talking about something else. And you expect me
You
to
was
work with that? I'm sorry, dude. What exactly do you think debate is? You prattle off your fucking monologue about, like, your view of the world without discussing, like, the things that you have said?
You see, it's because you're not willing to accept what someone else is saying as credible.
You're correct, David, because I don't think it's credible when you say that you checked that your wage rise was adjusted for
And
inflation. Because, and I made
I
it clear
didn't
why
say
that
that.
is,
I didn't say that.
if
I
you have
said
checked to
in
see if you
real
have seen a pay
terms,
rise
in
in real
real
terms,
terms,
and you know what any of that meant, it
I
meant
said
that
in
you
real
checked against
terms,
inflation. And I asked
in
you,
real terms, my wage rise was above
so what was
inflation.
inflation rate for last year?
That's what I asked you. You said 1.5%.
Okay, so how can you say that in real terms, which means that you've adjusted it for inflation, that you knew what inflation was last year? Do you understand the calculation that you would have to be doing? So you would be multiplying your previous wage by 1.5%, which would be, what is it, 0.015. You would take that figure and then you would add it to your old wage. And if that figure was less than your current wage, that meant that you would earn, that in real terms you were getting more than inflation.
Correct.
Don't say correct to me when it is fucking obvious you have no fucking idea.
No, I'm saying correct because not
Now,
only have I
now,
we
so
no,
David,
no.
when I
See,
asked you,
so
actually
let me
no,
explain.
David, when
Let
you
me
asked
explain.
me what
Let me explain.
1.5%, what the inflation rate
Let
was, it
me
meant, go on then.
explain. Right. Since I've been working at this company I'm working at,
Mhm.
yeah, we get a wage rise every single thing, every single April,
Mhm.
yeah, and it goes up. It's like 2.5%. But in that time also, I've also increased my wages by being promoted 3 years in a row, by getting a wage rise, by going from one grade to another.
Okay. So if I had told you that last year your inflation was 3%, what would you have
Right?
said in response?
If you told me last year I'd have got 2.5% in April,
Mhm.
yeah, and I also got a grade increase.
So you understand that a grade increase is not the same as a wage increase, correct?
No, a grade increase is a wage increase
It's a wage
because I
increase.
I
Sorry,
went.
when you get a grade increase, it's generally because you've taken on more responsibilities at the business you operate, or you've shown that you are more productive than other people. Which one was it?
Both.
Both. Okay. So, are you actually getting paid the same amount for the same work? Because you
No, I'm
aren't,
getting
are
paid.
you? Do you see now why I say it is a different thing?
No, it isn't a different thing
Okay.
because I am getting paid
So
for
if
the same
everyone, so
work.
let's say you got the
In
grade
fact, in
increase.
fact, I'm getting paid more now for less work,
Oh,
less physical
less
work.
physical work. So it's, yeah, but you're presumably generating more income for the company.
Well,
It's a different type of job, though, isn't
no,
it?
it's just a different part of a different part of
Yeah.
the factory. Yeah,
So we're going to take
it's not
two. We're
about
going to we're
generating
going to
more
take we're
income.
going to take two people in your company. Okay. One of them is you. The other one is someone who doesn't get a grade increase because they haven't been shown to be able to be responsible enough to take on the extra responsibility, and their productivity isn't as high as yours. But up until that
Mm-hmm.
point, you had both been paid the same. Yeah? You
Yeah.
both received the 2.5% increase. All right?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? In terms of, like, proportionally speaking, have you both proportionally been paid this, like, had the same pay increase?
Um, Proportionally, yeah,
Yeah, no,
in the same
absolutely.
wages, or someone on my grade, yeah,
We're not talking about grade now, right now. We're just talking about the 2.5% increase.
yeah,
Okay? But because you've been deemed to be more productive, you now get the grade increase. So effectively,
yeah.
you're getting greater remuneration because of the greater output of your labour, because your labour isn't equal to the other guy. Is that correct?
In your fashion, yeah,
In a fashion, yeah. So when I said that the only thing that's relevant here with regards to pay increase is the 2.5%, What I'm talking about is remuneration for equivalent labour. The 2.5% represents equivalent labour. The grade increase does not represent equivalent labour. You're getting it because your labour is worth more. So
Yeah.
therefore isn't equivalent. Right?
Yeah.
So that's why I was saying 2.5% increase and the grade increase are not both related to how you
No.
got a pay increase with regards
No.
to real terms.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in real terms, to me,
You're now just going to restate the same position as you said earlier without having listened to anything I just said, because you either don't understand it or you just don't care.
Honestly, mate, to me, me personally,
Go on.
me. I'm not talking about anyone else equivalent to me. I'm talking about me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me personally.
Yes.
I've had in the last 3 years, I've had 3 wage increases, plus the standard wage increase every April that is above inflation.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Sorry, you've just reminded me. Actually, I was going to check that.
That is a fact. Now, if you want to talk about it related to other people, that's fair enough.
Because you've sat down and done back of the envelope calculations to ensure that your 2.5% was in real terms a pay increase. Is that what you're telling me, Dave?
No, I'm telling you, the 2.5% is the standard, what everyone gets.
Oh God.
But me personally, that everyone got in the company. But me personally, I've had 3 grade increases since I started.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. No. Just agreeing with you.
So do you understand now, then? Yeah.
Yes, John. I definitely understand. Yes, David. I think I understand you. Anyway, anything else you want to talk about?
No.
Okay.
We'll have to do it again sometime, though.
Yeah, I'm off for
I've
that.
got about
John, do you
10
want to come in?
minutes. I just want to let you know I got about 10 minutes, so if we're wrapping up, that'd be a great time.
John.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mum.
Aww. John says he's wrapping up soon because he's got to leave in 10 minutes.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, John. Like, was a bit of a dull one for you, I suppose.
No. This was beautiful. This is going to be the one people listen to.
Oh. This is so not what I wanted. Genuinely.
No, this is going to be the one that blows up. Trust me.
This is... You're familiar with Destiny, aren't you, John?
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the concept of it.
No, I mean the YouTube guy.
Oh, no. Not at all.
Oh, okay, fair. Because, yeah, my worry is that you're right. Anyway, yeah.
Well, you tell David I had enjoyed the chat myself, but I have to run.
Yeah, isn't David here still?
I can't hear John.
Oh, shit. Sorry, Mum. John, David can't hear you.
Yes, I know, and I just told you to tell him that I enjoyed the chat, but I have to cut out.
Oh, okay, man. Dave, John says he enjoyed the chat, but he's going to have to bounce.
Yes,
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think this is a good place to wrap it up anyway. So, thank you both for the time. I appreciate it. And yeah, if you're up for doing it again sometime, Dave, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, sure.
Like, whatever you want. Whatever topic you want, I'm game.
Same here.
Alright, fantastic.
Alright then, mate.
Thanks a lot, man.
Later.
Thanks for giving the evening up. And thank you, John.
See you later, John.
Anytime.
Dave says bye, John.
Oh, I can hear him just fine.
Oh, yeah, of course you can. Fucking hell. Sorry, man. I am completely frazzled. Alright, bye, guys.
See you later.
Jesus.